Hey everybody, Zach again at New2Torah.com. Want to come in and do a video for you today. This is a video I have been dragging my feet on. I've been dragging my feet on doing this video like this because it's just so ridiculous, and I know so many people out there think it's ridiculous. And
first things first, just because you think something's ridiculous doesn't mean that it's not true. And just because lots of people think something is ridiculous also doesn't make it not true.
I mean, guys, I get emails from people who are like, Zach, why are you wasting your time on these silly topics? You should be doing Torah. And I totally agree. I totally agree with you. I should be. But you know what? I get a lot of emails about this topic. So much so that I've got to do, or in fact, I've recorded already multiple videos on this topic and decided not to upload them simply because I just thought this whole thing was going to go away because it got to be so ridiculous. And I'm like, do I really need to address this topic? And some of you people I know are going, what? Are you flat earth? Are you serious?
You should be serious because this is a pretty simple and pretty serious topic with very serious consequences. The reason why so many people are asking you to look into this is because once people actually look at this with rational thought and not just pre-programmed responses that we're all very familiar with, a scientific mind has no choice. There's no other conclusion than the obvious conclusion that the world is a stationary plane. And you should be honored and flattered that people think so highly of you as to come to you with a topic that they feel is important because they want you to look at it and they want you to dissect it. And later on in the diatribe, it appears that you did at one point start to look at this, but then what it seemed happened, and I guess this will be sort of the point that I try to prove in this video, is that you didn't actually apply the proper skepticism towards the globe model, which is critical, and instead what you did was fell back into the programming, which every last one of us is very familiar with. It's a standard educational system.
Yes, I'm serious. There are people out there who believe in a flat earth. And here's the deal. I was, for a very short time, I was going down that road because I watched a lot of the evidence that these people are pushing. I watched a lot of the videos these people were showing and passing around. And at the end of the day, I was like, Dude.
So you're just a casual observer in the decisions that you make or the models that you subscribe to. So you watch the videos and you watch the evidence that these people are pushing, and you were like, whoa. So what does that mean? I mean, does that make you a scientific person, or does that make you, well, sort of a casual observer of your decision-making process? And that's sort of the issue that we've got here on a massive, massive scale. And so there is a lot of bad information going around about the flat Earth, but a lot of that is misinformation because there's some very conclusive, very basic proof that shows the world couldn't possibly be a spinning globe. And the fact that you throw your hands up because of what these other people are pushing doesn't really ring true with you. It may be that that part was bull.
Dude, this looks pretty compelling. And I mean, after I got done watching the Mark Sargent videos, I was sold. And then when I was getting into the Eric Dubay videos and, Rob stuff. But, what do I tell people on my channel? I tell people, listen, if you hear an argument, go find someone who disagrees and see what they say about the argument.
Really? Seriously? So that's how you perform science? How does that qualify you to even talk about this? So if you hear an argument that convinces you of something, in order to verify that, you go to someone that disagrees with the argument and then let them convince you otherwise. One thing that I've done personally, and what a lot of the really serious flat earthers out there have actually done, is they've gone out and done the experimentation for themselves. And that's what a scientific person would do. Just going to point that out. Now, I'm also going to point out that Mark Sargent, Rob Skiba, and Eric Dubay are all pretty high-profile flat earthers, but I don't think that all flat earthers necessarily agree with each and every one of their exact models. Now, we can all certainly agree that the Earth couldn't possibly be a spinning globe, so we definitely have some common ground there, but I believe at least two of the three, if not all of the three, are sort of pushing an enclosed system flat Earth, which is the exact contrary to the model that a lot of flat earthers subscribe to. Now, there is a lot of connotations about a dome in the sky that is purported by all three of those gentlemen. Whether they subscribe to that model or not, I'm not going to profess to that. That's sort of beyond the scope of this video. However, what I will tell you is that I believe there's very good evidence that there isn't any physical firmament, there isn't any sort of dome in the sky. And so, I just don't necessarily go to Mark Sargent, Rob Skiba, and Eric Dubay for all of my information. Dr. Robotham put it fairly poetically and said that nature answers us every time we ask a question, and the questions come in the form of experiments. And so experimentation does not involve going and asking people what they think about a topic because, frankly, what people think is irrelevant to the truth. And oftentimes, what people think is the antithesis of the truth. And so people are sort of poor sources of information. Eyewitness testimony is the most flimsy of all, and yet it is allowed in a court of law. But 5 people can witness the same event and have 5 completely different stories of what transpired during that event. And so one of the things that a lot of the people that I would consider my peers have done is they have actually taken the time to do lots of different sorts of experimentation to prove this thing one way or another because we're curious and we don't want to just go ask people their opinion. And what we've found, shockingly enough, is that, again, the world couldn't possibly be a spinning globe, and I'll invite you to check out my YouTube channel if you actually want proof that isn't involving any sort of dome in the sky.
Find someone who disagrees and hear their side of the story. And so I did that. And, as the more I did it, the more I was like, dude, this is completely ridiculous. Why does anybody get sucked into this? And listen, here's the deal. I have some good friends who are going down this road, who are believing in the flat earth. They want to go, they think it's true. And listen, here's the deal, guy. If you're Rob Skiba, a good friend of mine, I love me some Rob Skiba, but he's all but said now that he is a flat earther. And, I have other people who've been exploring this, and I don't want to offend anyone. I love you guys. I love everyone. And listen, hey, listen, if just because we disagree on something and even disagree passionately doesn't mean I can't sit down with you at the end of the day and break bread with you and say I love you.
Well, that's a very noble concept, and I'll have to agree. I think that it's great that we can have disagreements in a civil sort of way without making any sort of fun of one another, and just stick to the facts, stick to the science, and let's not get caught up with emotions and essentially condescending one another. That's counterproductive to the scientific method. And yeah, love you too, man.
Okay. And so I love you guys. I love anyway. It's just here's the deal. I just because you disagree with me doesn't mean I'm going to divide over a topic. Does that make sense? But I disagree. I still disagree passionately. And so the whole point of this video is five reasons why I believe the Earth is a globe. Why I believe the Earth is round.
I'd really love to hear this because I've actually been trying to find one good reason why the world is round for the last 7.5 months, and actually all I've found is irrefutable proof, literally piles and piles, never-ending mountains of empirical evidence that the world isn't a spinning globe and is actually a stationary plane.
Okay, so five reasons why I believe the Earth is round. We're going to go through them today. And then, I'm going to issue you a challenge at the end of the video. So let's go ahead and get started. Number one, well, I believe the Earth is round. It's a giant conspiracy. It would have to be a giant, major conspiracy.
No, actually, it wouldn't. It wouldn't have to be all that big of a conspiracy. What I believe it involved was actually a long series of scientifically accurate or logically viable misunderstandings. The ancient Greeks theorized the heliocentric spinning globe Earth model with the Earth spinning around the sun, and up until that point, and many many hundreds of years after, most of the world actually believed that the Earth was a stationary plane. Um, so it didn't have to be that big of a conspiracy. What it involved now, in the last 100 years, it's become a pretty big conspiracy in terms of NASA and the world military powers. But up until then, this was all very much hotly debated scientifically, and it was a topic that was really not provable with the technologies. Like, for example, Newton was unaware of things like electromagnetic forces, and there weren't things like airplanes, and there weren't things like high altitude weather balloons. Up until the last couple of 100 years, every one of those things was, not even possible. And so, if you've ever heard the old story of the scientists debating how many teeth a horse had, and they went back and forth for hours and hours and hours debating on how many teeth a horse had, and finally, the way that they solved the issue was they sent one of the farmers outside to actually count them, and that ended the debate. Unfortunately, the theoretical model of a spinning globe Earth is sort of beyond the capacity for an ancient human to really prove or disprove one way or another, or so it would seem. In the 1860s, Parallax, Dr. Robotham, he penned the book Earth Not a Globe, Zetetic Astronomy. He did lots of experimentation with the tools of the time, and proved very conclusively that the Earth isn't a spinning globe. But things like hot air balloons were around then, but those types of things weren't around for Newton or the ancient Greeks, certainly. So the conspiracy part of it is birthed out of a huge misunderstanding of theoretical physics, and up until the point where NASA took over, then yeah, that's where there's definitely some trickery going on. But what do you expect from a bunch of Freemasons that are under the control of the military or with the funding of the military?
For this to be true. Folks, do you know how many space agencies there are around the world? Okay, just hear me out. There are a lot. Every industrialized nation today, even semi-industrialized nations today, have a space agency.
Okay, so what does that prove? First of all of the world military powers definitely want to maintain the status quo and maintain control over people. Furthermore, every last one of those space-aged world military powers is a proud member of the Antarctic Treaty. So I'll tell you what, Zach, when you get these world military powers to abolish the Antarctic Treaty, which is an antiquated treaty since the 1950s involving the world military powers preventing corporations and basically free roaming of the southernmost region of the world, when it's full of all sorts of things like coal and fuel and possibly uranium and just endless possibilities, we're talking about an entire continent on the bottom of a sphere, right? Well, no, we're actually talking about, and you've obviously looked at the model, but I guess I should explain it since you obviously don't get it. Um, Antarctica is not a continent on the bottom of a sphere. It is basically enveloping the entire world 360 degrees, with the North Pole being the center of the map, like the center of a dartboard, and the Antarctic being the outside ring of the dartboard, with the northern and southern hemispheres being the innermost ring and middle ring, respectively. So it goes bullseye, northern hemisphere, southern hemisphere, and then Antarctica.
They have their own government space. So it's not like it's just NASA lying to everybody, okay? There are lots of space agencies, and many of them have rocket capabilities. Many of them have satellite orbiting capabilities. Many of them have command and control facilities for their space programs.
Zach, there is no such thing as space. It's a lie. Yes, NASA was lying, and the world military powers, the world governments saw what an excellent job that huge propaganda campaign did, not only to rake in revenue. Yeah, that's what the government considers your money, is revenue. Every last bit of your money that they can get, which is usually extracted via tax, but they consider your money revenue. So think about that, because governments are a tick on the ass of any people. That's what they are. I realize that you're very comfortable with Star Wars and the heliocentric model, and you're very comfortable with the fairy tale that was sold to you when you were a toddler. Unfortunately, that doesn't prove anything. The fact that there are government agencies snowing the people of the world, raping them for most of their money, because that's revenue, and also imprisoning us, theoretically speaking, on a globe Earth that doesn't exist. The spinning globe Earth only exists in your mind, but none of us have ever actually been on a spinning globe with a circumference of 25,000 miles.
These people, and these are staffed by intelligent people. And the kicker to me is that most of these space agencies don't work and play well with one another.
You know who else doesn't work and play well with one another? Hulk Hogan and Andre the Giant. They didn't work and play well together, and that's exactly the tactic of divide and conquer. It's a show. The world is a stage. The world military powers call it the theater of war, because that's exactly what it is. They pretend not to get along, and secretly they're actually very much in collusion. I submit the United States has been very closely allied with Russia for the duration of the Cold War and ever since World War II. But they've realized that in order to maintain control over people, if you've never read George Orwell's 1984, it's a very interesting read, because it shows how governments use propaganda and basically fear porn to keep people under control. If people are afraid of the boogeyman overseas that wants to kill you, then what does the people want to do in response? They want to kill the boogeyman overseas. And so if you do that to all the people, you keep the world divided and you keep us at war. And by the way, these governments stand to profit immensely from war. That's the entire economy is based on war, especially here in the United States. And if you really trust all these governments, then you've got a long road to hoe. Remember, their number one goal, any government agency, is always the antithesis of what it's set up for. So the Drug Enforcement Agency is actually intended to bring drugs into the country, and this is very true. It's not any sort of conspiracy theory. The CIA and the DEA have been bringing the hardcore drugs in from overseas since long before Vietnam, but especially during Vietnam. You can't trust the governments, Zach, and that doesn't prove anything that the governments have smart people. So what does that make you? You just blindly repeat what the smart people tell you. Okay. And how does that qualify you to comment on this topic seriously? you think that qualifies you somehow to comment on this topic by pointing to the smart people who are looking into this.
They just don't. They don't work. They don't like each other. The politics, amongst many of these countries are not, good. We're not in good standing with one another.
We stay cool, we stay calm. Hope it's been a total turmoil. Oscar, there you go. Wait a minute. Oscar now. The last minute, for the place. 15 years. Pick up the Oscar. Come on.
Russia is about to kick the United States off of its rockets because we're using Russia right now to hitch rides up to the International Space Station, which I know some of you guys out there don't believe the International Space Station doesn't even exist, which is just crazy.
No, actually what's crazy is believing that the International Space Station exists flying around a spherical Earth. There's some pretty good evidence that the International Space Station is a big hoax. Up until recently, I conceded that there may be some sort of an orbiting tin can, which is going in concentric circles around the North Pole, which again is the center of the map, just like all of these celestial bodies do. However, I've seen some fairly compelling evidence that what astronomers see in the night sky that is called the International Space Station may actually be just a spy plane a lot closer than we're told, with some retrofitting to make it look like the International Space Station would. However, the International Space Station is sort of a moot point. In the flat Earth model, I suppose you could have something like the International Space Station up there, but it's not going around a spinning globe. That's the point. I think that you've sort of missed a lot of points because you're going off into these tangents about how the International Space Station is absolutely real, as if you've been on it and as if you were reared on it or something. But if you're like most people, you've probably never even seen it. So for you to purport that it's absolutely real and people who think that it's possibly a hoax are crazy, that makes you just a little bit gullible and the opposite of a scientist. Just saying. Sorry.
Crazy. But okay, Russia is ready to kick us off. So what is stopping Russia? What is stopping Iran? What is stopping Kazakhstan? What is stopping all of these other countries who have space programs from saying, hey, I just want to let y'all know I'm blowing the whistle on NASA and this evil empire called the Great United States, that they are in fact lying to you that the Earth is flat. The Earth is flat. What stops those countries from coming out and saying that? Nothing. Oh, it's about control, Zach, don't you know? It's control. They're controlling. What?
Gotta tell you, Zach, you're an excellent example of how well the control works. Think about that for a second. They're lying to you that the Earth is flat. One of the other nations would have told us by now. So that's your position. You do realize that the globe Earth lie is pushed on all toddlers of all races, of all creeds, of all colors, of all nations. Globularism, or the belief in a heliocentric universe, or the belief in the Earth being a spinning globe, is literally taught in all countries. Now, there's probably some indigenous tribes of people running around naked in the woods somewhere who still think the Earth is not a globe, but that's only because the scientifical pontificates haven't gotten to their generation of toddlers just yet. So it somehow makes you feel smart and confident to believe in a fairy tale that was sold to you and all the other toddlers, and since everyone believes it, then you must believe it because you base your conclusions on popular opinion instead of scientific fact.
They don't care about us. They don't care about our control, the people who control the stuff in the Western world. There's lots of these Eastern nations who... Come on, this is so crazy.
أولا نحن الآن في أين؟
First of all, where are we now?
نريد أن نذهب إلى الصين بالطيارة.
We go to Sharjah Airport to travel to China by plane. Clear? Now focus with me. The Earth this is the Earth. If you say that it rotates, if we leave Sharjah Airport on international flight to China, the Earth is rotating, right? So if the plane stops in the air, wouldn't China be coming towards it? True or not?
طيب لو كانت
That's very
الشمس
true.
الأرض
If
تدور
the Earth
هكذا،
rotates on the other direction,
لو تمشي الطيارة ما أدري كم تمشي،
plane will
لن
not be able to
تستطيع أن
reach
تلحق
China
الصين، لأن الصين تدور وأنت تدور، ولن تستطيع أن تصل إلى
because
الصين
China
لأنك
is also
تدور وهي
rotating
تدور.
as the plane
فكيف
rotates.
تصل إلى الصين؟
So this cleric is called Sheikh al-Kabari. He also, Mark, just before you say anything, he also rejected NASA's lunar excursions as Hollywood puff.
There are so many telecommunications companies out there today that they have their own satellites, they have their own data and pictures and cameras up there, and they have but that's fake, right? It's all fake, and all these telecommunications are staffed and run by the NSA and NASA, and they're all a bunch of Nazi plants.
Where are you getting your information? The National Enquirer? The crazy guy next door? Or are you actually doing research? If you take the time to look into this, what satellites are supposedly used for, those ends can easily be achieved by ground-based, tower-based, essentially Tesla-based technologies, which were, for all intents and purposes, covered up upon his death and monetized. And we were tricked into believing that we needed to launch satellites into space to achieve these ends. In terms of GPS, can be done with triangulation using radio towers. The internet was all theoretically possible with Tesla-based technologies, even in the 1940s and 50s. So, no, I'm not saying that all of the communications companies are Nazi plants. What the fact is that satellites couldn't possibly function in such a way that they say that they do. You can't send radio frequency waves hundreds and hundreds and even thousands of miles through layers of atmosphere and layers of electromagnetic fields. They attenuate into the background noise, and it simply doesn't work in theory or in reality. In reality, if you're not somewhere near a cell phone tower, you don't get GPS. If you are way out in the middle of the ocean, even though there's supposedly thousands, tens of thousands of satellites up there, you can't get a signal often. And the sad thing is we do not need satellites, and we don't even need a huge conspiracy. All we need is the military sending data to the communications companies, because that's ultimately where all this is coming from. And the communications companies do not have cameras and pictures up there. Find one real image of all these satellites. You'll never find it. You'll not find one single image or camera feed from any of these satellites. All you ever get is poorly done CGI, and high altitude flights are certainly possible to get similar images from satellites. But the fact is all of the mapping is done. Same thing with weather radar is all done from ground-based systems, and satellites are theoretically useless. They're unnecessary. And this is all sort of besides the point. You've gone off on this wild tangent about satellites because you believe they're up there with absolutely no physical evidence. But even if there are satellites orbiting in circles concentric with the North Pole, it still doesn't make the Earth a globe. You're pretty bad at this whole science thing, I gotta tell you.
Come on, seriously? Is this the conspiracy road you're gonna... Guys, listen, I am all about conspiracies. I love conspiracies. But the more I research this, it's not a conspiracy.
What have you researched? I haven't seen anything that compels me, and nothing that haven't already heard a zillion times that compels me to even consider the world as a spinning globe. So far, your research involves asking people what they think, and also going back to your childhood love of satellites and infinite space. The whole point here of the flat earth movement is to question the assumptions that we've all been handed. Now, granted, there's a lot of misinformation out there, and I think it's sort of a shame that you've obviously stumbled upon all sorts of really bad information, obviously, because any rational, skeptical person that sees the evidence that I'm very much aware of couldn't come to any other conclusion. And I think it's probably the reason why that you've come to such a wild, bizarre conclusion and threw your hands up in disgust and confusion is because you're not actually researching. You're just getting people's opinions on things, and the old saying, everybody's got an opinion. It's sort of like a butthole. And so getting people's opinions of things or polling people might get you some interesting statistics, but in terms of taking you closer towards the truth, it is a very treacherous path indeed. People are so very fickle and so easily manipulated, and their opinions suggested to them, and our beliefs formed when we're just gullible little toddlers. You know, I think that your definition of research is something completely different than my definition of research, and perhaps you need to look up the definition of research. Research, the systematic investigation into and study of materials and sources in order to establish facts and reach new conclusions. Or verb, investigate systematically. I believe the way that I would define what you've been doing would be gossip. Casual or unconstrained conversation or reports about other people, typically involving details that are not confirmed as being true.
There's just no conspiracy here. The Earth actually is round. It's not that hard to figure out. And if it wasn't,
So that's how you prove things. You just assert them. You just say, there is no conspiracy, it is round. And this claim is a claim that we're all familiar with. Do you think that we've gone through our entire lives on this planet Earth, in quotes, not understanding that the conventional narrative is the Earth being round, as if that's something new to us that we had never heard before? You know, I really was kind of hoping to see some good proof of a globe here, but all I've seen so far is basically you enacting the programming that we've all been trained to execute since we were toddlers. And this programming doesn't prove anything except for your unwillingness to look at theoretical models beyond what we're all very familiar with. And by the way, did you know that most people think the Earth is a globe? I didn't know that until you just told me a few minutes ago.
folks, did you know that there are 7 companies now that are doing tourist? There are 7 privately held companies that are going to be offering tours, and one of the companies has already sent people into space, into lower orbits around the planet.
7 citizens have ever been to quote unquote space, and I believe all of them are billionaires because normal people can't afford it. But think about this for a second. How hard do you think it would be to trick an ordinary Joe, an ordinary citizen? How hard do you think it would be to trick them into believing that you sent them into quote-unquote outer space? I don't think it would be that hard. People go up into airplanes and think that they see the curve of the Earth from an airplane when in fact all they're seeing is the horizon. But I don't see how 7 people going into space proves the world as a globe. People can get up into high altitude crafts and they can go around. If you go way above the atmosphere, I guess you can consider that space, but the point still stands. The Earth couldn't possibly be a globe. There's literally piles and piles and piles of verifiable, repeatable proof that anybody can, repeat and scrutinize and realize. But unfortunately, it's very difficult for most people to even consider this fact because of all of this programming about space that we've grown up with as sci-fi buffs.
So what's to stop these tours from happening? What is the government going to stand in and say, hey, or is the government going to screen these tourists who go up in these spacecrafts, these privately companied spacecraft, and say, hey, so when you get up there, you might see something that's a little bit strange. It may appear to you that the Earth is flat, but no. Actually, its globe is just you're fooling your eyes. So here, take this GoPro camera with a fisheye lens and take all your pictures with it.
So you honestly believe that 7 billionaires going into space and not realizing that the Earth actually isn't a globe is somehow proof that the world is a globe? This is preposterous. First of all, I've never met any of those 7 people that are not Freemasonic astronauts who have ever been into so-called space, low Earth orbit, which I don't know if you've ever watched the ISS feed, but low Earth orbit looks awfully similar to high altitude flight. And I submit that it would be extremely easy to trick every person in the world if you take them up high up in a plane or in a spacecraft-looking glider or whatever it is they flew up there in. I don't believe billionaires about much anyway, but let's assume they're telling the truth and they actually went up there and they didn't realize the Earth isn't a spinning globe. Well, Zach, let me ask you a question. How many airline flights have you been on? I'm willing to bet you've at least been on to one. Did you notice that the Earth isn't a spinning globe when you were on an airline flight? When I was about 10 years old, I had a major problem coming to terms with the fact that the flight from Florida over to Dallas-Fort Worth was identical in duration to the return flight, which is totally impossible on a world with all the destinations constantly spinning about 750 miles per hour towards the east. And it doesn't matter what you ask somebody, the Coriolis effect proves that the Earth isn't a spinning globe. The Coriolis effect is a behavior of how bodies that are stuck to a rotational frame of reference react when they're compelled in a direction contrary to that rotational frame of reference. They will absolutely not remain fixed to the rotational frame of reference. So if you take the example of a jet airplane with multiple jet engines attached, it absolutely will not stay fixed to the rotational frame of reference once it takes off into the air and starts propelling itself in, say, the opposite direction as the spin of the Earth. But nobody notices this because we've all been very well programmed since we were toddlers to 100% believe, no matter what, that the Earth is a spinning globe. And so the fact that average citizens have gone up into low Earth orbit and didn't come down professing the Earth to be a stationary plane is no surprise. I submit you could send probably thousands of people into so-called low Earth orbit, and they wouldn't be they'd be none the wiser. It doesn't prove anything. It just proves what poor observers most people are. It proves how badly we've all been brainwashed and how most people just simply are incapable of considering the world as being anything but a spinning globe. But again, human psychology doesn't prove anything about the shape and nature of the world. The simple fact is there's no curvature and it's not spinning. If the world is a stationary plane, then it is fundamentally contrary to a spinning globe. The two ideas, the two concepts are mutually exclusive. So the fact that people don't realize this doesn't prove anything.
Is that what you're saying? Really? That all these tourist companies, these private tourist companies, these mining companies, there's companies that are formed now that they're preparing to send vehicles to the moon and to asteroids to mine some of the mineral ores on these asteroids.
Do you have parents, Zach? If your parents grew up in the 1960s, which I would imagine they did, I'm not sure how old you are. The beard sort of makes it difficult. But if you ask somebody that was around in the 1960s, they'll tell you that we were supposed to have moon bases in the 1980s. As a matter of fact, did you know that in the 1950s, they referred to themselves as the space age, and nobody had even been to space, but they were planning on it. And of course, NASA delivered, went to the moon, and nobody ever went back to the moon for decades and decades later. But we were promised all sorts of things. By the year 2000, I believe we were supposed to have Mars bases. But so you think that since companies are preparing to go to the moon and start mining, that somehow proves we live on a globe? That's ridiculous. When I debated the Harvard astrophysicist Dr. Josh Grindley, we were debating on whether or not gravity was a proven fact or a nonsensical theory. Now, I'll tell you the answer. Gravity is not a proved fact. It's never been proven. It's just a theory. And so the good doctor kept telling me that within the next 5 years, we'd have telescopes that are strong enough to detect gravity waves. He also told me that our telescopes right now are almost sensitive enough to detect gravity waves, but the fact of the matter is, what remains to be proved is not proved, no matter how hard you wish it to be proved or plan it to be proved. Proving a thing is far removed than wanting something to be true, just so you know.
All of these companies are fake. They're all staffed by NASA. They're all staffed by Nazi sympathizers, and it's all a gag.
Since you obviously don't know much about business, the idea of a company is to make money. Now, there are companies out there that are raking in millions of dollars from just regular people that want to be on a list to go to Mars. So does that mean we went to Mars? I'm failing to understand your logic here. I mean, it's taking just wild leaps to basically apologize for the globe model, and I still haven't heard one single bit of evidence that shows the world has any curvature or any rotational motion or orbital motion. Again, so far, no good. But I guess we haven't gotten into the proofs yet. I'm chomping at the bits, waiting to hear the good stuff.
Everyone's in on the gag, right?
It's so funny because no, everyone is not in on the gag. Zach, are you in on the gag? You are disseminating the globe Earth model, even though it's totally false. Are you a shill? Are you a Nazi sympathizer? No, absolutely not. You're just like everyone else. You've been tricked into believing this nonsensical lie all your life, and that makes you part of the deception as an unwitting participant and proponent of a lie.
Are you serious? They just gave a patent to a private company in Canada this year in 2015 for a 12-mile inflatable tower that they're going to be able to launch aircraft up into space from the top of this tower.
Okay, and that proves what? That's sort of reminiscent of the Tower of Babel, isn't it? A little odd. I thought you were a biblical man, but you failed to see the connection there. If you're familiar with the term geostationary orbit, so if you were to build a tower high enough, there's a specific distance from the face of the Earth which is conducive to geostationary orbit, and in order to reach that condition, you have to be at a specific speed and at a specific distance from the face of the Earth, and when you reach that distance and when you reach that speed, then you are in geostationary orbit, which means you don't move away from the point that you're directly, above of the globe. You just stay fixed to the face of the Earth. Now, again, I'm humoring the heliocentric spinning Earth model here, but theoretically, that's what they say. I believe it was a Russian scientist who first realized that if you were to build a tower tall enough, it's surely much, much taller than the inflatable tower than you're talking about. But just I'm giving you a little background here. If you were to build a tower that was just as tall as that distance to geostationary orbit, you would naturally reach the velocity just from the length of the tower. So let me break this down for you. At the equator, the face of the Earth is supposedly spinning about 1,037.5 miles per hour towards the east. Now, if you were to build a tower from the equator straight up into the sky, for every, say, mile that you gain in altitude above the face of the Earth, you'd actually be going faster and faster and faster as compared to the ground below. You understand that's because if you spin like a round object, the longer and longer you make the radius of the object, the faster the outside edge is spinning. So if you spin a basketball on your finger, the piece of the basketball that your finger is touching is spinning a lot more slowly than, say, the equator of the basketball. And if you were to stick a very long stick out from the equator of the basketball, the end of that stick would be spinning much, much faster than the equator of the basketball. And this is the same principle of rotational motion that is, theorized to basically hack geostationary orbit theoretically by building this big tall tower that gets right up to the altitude of geostationary orbit and would just naturally have the velocity to hover a spacecraft off of the tower, and it would already be at the natural geosynchronous orbit velocity just from that altitude at the equator. So with that being said, what does any of this prove? Well, somebody has a patent for something. Okay, I have a patent that says I'm Napoleon. Does that make it so? You act like these companies are gods, and whatever they plan to do must make something 100% true. So if that same company planned to, plant one of Jack's beanstalk beans, does that mean giants exist in the sky? Or would that be just nonsensical hyperbole? If you said nonsensical hyperbole, you'd be absolutely correct. However, you're guilty of it. That is, guilty of nonsensical hyperbole extraordinaire.
Why 12 miles high? Because you lose the amount of atmosphere. It prevents you from going through 12 miles of atmosphere that eats up a lot of gas to get through those layers of atmosphere, so it gives you an easier time to get into space.
So what are you suggesting, that there is no atmosphere if the Earth is flat? I'm failing to see the connection, but I'll just go ahead and go on the record here and tell you that the flat Earth model indeed has atmosphere. Barometric pressure is actually one of the fundamental pillars of the flat Earth model, since gravity doesn't theoretically need to exist if we actually don't live on a spinning globe, which we don't. And so atmosphere is what renders your mass with weight on a scale. If you were to travel to the top of Mount Everest, you'd weigh slightly less due to this principle. However, again, I'm failing to see your chain of logic here. So your chain of logic is there is atmosphere, therefore we live on a globe? Okay.
It's basically saving on fuel. It's a fuel saver, is basically the point of it. But they just issued a patent to a private company.
So a private company plans a fuel saver, and that means we live on a globe. I mean, really? I don't get it, Zach. I'm sorry. I am really sort of scared by your logic here. No offense. I'm not making fun of you or anything. I'm just saying. It's a little creepy.
That's going to be a 12-mile tower. So let me ask you this. When they build this 12-mile tower and they start putting basically the Russians and U.S. and all these people start putting tours into space, how are they gonna hide the flat Earth then?
Okay, so here we go again. You're still talking about things that might or might not happen in the future, but again, it's pretty easy to trick people into thinking they live on a globe, since everybody already thinks we live on a globe. It's not like we're pulling off some David Copperfield stuff here. We're simply, we're taking the kids to see Santa Claus, and the kids still believe in Santa Claus. Gullible little...
If what you're saying is true, they would nix all these tourist companies. They would nix the mining companies. They would nix all the... Guys, it's too big of a conspiracy. That's my number one. Why the Earth is round. The number one reason.
So your number one reason why the stationary plane Earth is a spinning globe is because companies might send people into space one day. Because companies might mine for ore on the moon one day. Okay. So monkeys might fly out of my butt. Does that mean the Wicked Witch of the West lives in there?
Why the Earth is round? Because as if it was flat, it'd be too big of a conspiracy to hide. That alone should just tell you that these people who are pushing this are just bat crap crazy.
It's very ironic that you would say that, because the people who are pushing the heliocentric model are just bat crap crazy, or just bat crap gullible. Not trying to insult you or anything, just saying.
Simple. All right, number 2, footage. There is so much footage out there today that's not U.S. controlled anymore. It's not NASA, it's Japan, it's Russia, it's all these different companies out there and government agencies that are not U.S. controlled who are coming back with footage. RT today has some of the greatest footage out there that they put up.
I should quickly point out that any average person can send up a weather balloon or observe weather balloon footage. You don't have to be part of a government agency or a scientific body to do experiments. I don't know if you knew that. So in other words, you don't have to have a license to be a scientist. All you have to do is want to know the truth and follow the scientific method.
On their channel. And guys, RT, I mean, the U.S. Secretary of State is railing on RT about how, in Russia today, the U.S. and RT, I mean, you look at the State Department and the guys at RT that go in, and they're like this.
Hogan starting off extremely fast. I can't believe he's rocked the giant. Here he comes off the road. The Hulkster hammering away on a 7'5" giant. Look at that.
He can't knock him off his feet, though. Look at the strength of Andre. He's taking everything Hogan can throw.
Yeah, okay, and I challenge you to find one single real picture or continuous live animation or just any believable animation of the spinning sphere Earth. I bet you $1 million that you can't find anything. It's all CG composites, it's all poorly done fakes, and there's some recent stuff that looks pretty good, but even the recent stuff has problems with it. But again, if you want to blindly believe that the government is out there looking for your best interests and the world governments are frenemies and enemies and you're just falling for the theater of war. If you look back at 9/11, did you know that the only family in the United States that was able to fly in the grim days following 9/11 was the Bin Laden family? As a matter of fact, they flew out of Florida and they went to Afghanistan, and in just a couple days after 9/11, when all other civilian planes in the entire world were grounded. You couldn't fly anywhere unless you were a bin Laden or a Bush. And so this is just an example of how the governments are not at each other's throats like you would think. Again, the world is a stage, and people are fed propaganda in order to react in certain ways and to believe certain things. And that's why I think it's so important that we all critically look and critically review all of these assumptions that we've taken for our entire lives as fact. And unfortunately, we're still at this same point here. I feel like I'm getting a bit redundant. I hope you didn't feel that way. But we're still at the same point where you haven't proven a thing except for your inability to objectively scrutinize assumptions, that we're all very familiar with.
They're fighting each other. They hate each other. And you're telling me that RT is just going to go along with the flow? They look for any opportunity to make the U.S. look like idiots.
I should point out that the U.S. is doing a perfectly adequate job of making themselves, or making ourselves. I don't like to include myself with the U.S. government because we're two totally different things. But the U.S. government is doing an excellent job of making itself look very stupid. They don't need RT's help. One thing I will tell you, however, is that RT could probably just stand for Rockefeller Television or Rothschild Television, but it's a mainstream media outlet, for crying out loud. So do you just believe everything that you're told on mainstream media? Did you believe everything that was said by Hulk Hogan to Andre the Giant? Or do you think they probably went and had a beer after the show? I think they probably went and had a beer after the show.
But they're in on the gag, right? They're in on the gag. Guys, the stuff that these cosmonauts and people who are paying the Soviet or the Russians millions and millions, tens of millions of dollars to go up into space with, they're bringing their GoPro cameras, they're bringing their cell phones, they're bringing their own photography, and they're coming back with footage. And guys, it looks round.
Okay, so the first thing I'll tell you is you don't have to be a millionaire in space to prove this thing one way or another. You say that it looks round, but the image that we're looking at here, the animation that we're looking at here, is a fake. You actually can't see the street lights from space, Zach. That's animated in. That's actually a CGI composite. That isn't a real image. And the millionaires that go to outer space are, if I'm not mistaken, probably going to be Freemasons. And even if they're not, again, it's very easy to trick gullible children into believing in Santa Claus, and taking them to the mall to see Santa isn't going to hurt their belief in Santa Claus, if you sort of see the analogy there.
And they're coming back with footage, and guys, it looks round. And there's not all fisheye lenses, folks. Oh, it's all fisheye lenses, Zach. No, it's not. It's not. You guys need to go out in there and do some digging other than NASA and look at some of this stuff, because it's just crazy. The footage alone.
No, it's not all fisheye lenses. There's a lot of CGI and a lot of real high altitude flights that you can use cameras to get achieve an end. I mean, you said later on in this diatribe that you went to Full Sail. And I actually grew up in Central Florida, so I know that Full Sail is a school for liberal arts, musicians, graphic designers, and I'm not too sure how that qualifies you as an educated participant in this conversation, because in order to participate in a scientific study or even a scientific debate, you really have to be familiar with the subject matter at hand. And I'm not trying to say that you didn't do your version of research into the flat earth model, but you absolutely did not, and provably did not, do the actual research and the important research into the subject of inquiry. Looking at pictures and computer composites and animations that are fake and pointing to that as proof of the shape and nature of the world is theoretical scientific folly. Where is all this footage, by the way? There isn't any. The only footage that you're going to see that's convincing of a globe Earth is from the Apollo astronauts, and more recently from the Japanese. What you showed was CGI.
Number two. That's my number two reason. Number three reason. The math doesn't work out. The math is completely off. This is something that was huge for me when I first was researching this thing, because I went back to, I was in the military, and before I went in the military, I was in military schools most of my life since junior high. So since junior high, and I went to Cleveland Junior Naval Academy. It was the only Naval Academy high school in the country, and it was based in St. Louis. It was sponsored by the U.S. Navy, and every year a couple of cadets were selected to go to Annapolis, and I could say about half of the school every year, the graduating class went on to service in the military.
Okay, let me stop this right here. First of all, you obviously haven't looked at the math because the math does work in both models. All sorts of math works in both models because it's mainly theoretical. For example, the distance to the sun can be sort of estimated by measuring the angles and distances of the shadows cast by the sun at high noon on multiple points on the same meridian line with many miles in between each point on the same meridian again at noon. By measuring the angles and the shadows cast by the sun at that time, you can use Euclidean geometry, or basically the Pythagorean theorem, to estimate how far away is the sun, or at least how far away is the source of light appear to be. At the end of the day, if you do this plain trigonometry calculation, it proves the sun to be about 3,000 to 4,000 miles away. Now, on the other hand, if you assume that the Earth is a sphere with a circumference of 25,000 miles and plug in the numbers using spherical trigonometry instead of plane trigonometry, so by adding a layer of complexity into the equation and assuming that the Earth is a sphere, then you get the nonsensical conclusion that the sun is 93 million miles away. So that's just one example of how the math actually works in both models, and that sort of proves to me that you haven't looked at the math. Furthermore, I don't think where you went to junior high really changes anything. The military junior academy that you went to seems like maybe you're getting ready to talk about how they taught you navigational skills. Just so you know, if you're navigating at sea, you use either the Loran system in modern times before GPS, and actually they still use the Loran system, by the way, but you're using a flat Earth map. You assume the Earth to be a plane, and the maps work in both models, but that's only because the maps are drawn to work in both models. So your position is just fallacious right off the bat.
Including myself. And we had this class called Naval Science. Every year, Naval Science 1, 2, 3, 4, 4 being senior. This was my junior year Naval Science book. And in it, there is an awesome section in here about navigating, learning how to navigate on a maneuvering board. That's how you learned how to navigate. And you had to do it by hand. It's mathematics. You have to learn how to do it by hand.
Okay, this is something that you don't seem to understand, dude. People have been navigating the seas since long before a globe Earth was ever postulated. If you look at history, people for most of history, most especially ancient history, believed the world to be a stationary plane. And even during and after the time when the Greeks postulated a heliocentric model, most of the world still didn't believe the Greeks. It was a very bizarre, outlandish theory because the world is very obviously a stationary plane. The observations of astronomers and different observations here on the ground can sort of be viewed differently to work in either model if you're not really scrutinizing it and if you don't have the technology to get the definitive evidence that you need one way or another. But yeah, navigators have been navigating the seas on globe Earth maps and flat Earth maps, and it works either way because all a map is a representation of where you are. And so where you are could be wrapped around a triangle. That map could be wrapped around a cube, and it would still work as long as you sort of know where you're at and what the relative distances are. That's how maps work. That's how the math works. You obviously haven't taken much time to study the flat Earth model where the northern magnetic compasses are attracted to the center of the map, and by circumnavigating around and keeping the compass needle pointed to the right and just keeping your heading at a right angle to north and south and just keep going due west or due east, whichever way you're going, and you'll eventually describe a circle on a plane. And so navigation, circumnavigation, and the mathematics all work in either model. That's how any person could come to either model and agree with it because, of course, the math can be made to work. That's one of the fundamental flaws in the globe Earth logic. people seem to think that certain observations are exclusive to a globe, like the masts of the ships appearing over the horizon before the hull, or circumnavigation is only possible on a globe. Plate tectonics are only possible on a spinning globe, which I've never understood how that works. The plate tectonics obviously work very nicely on a stationary plane. People seem to think that when they drop a brick on their foot, that proves we live on a spinning globe Earth. And if you just take a step back from this just for a minute and think about that for just a second, if you possibly can, think how silly is that to equate an object falling to the ground when you let go of it to somehow prove that we live on a spinning globe. It's preposterous. There is no logic to it. I do invite you to watch my most recent series, Earth Not a Globe. There's 3 parts. I've done dozens of videos proving the world to be a stationary plane, and I invite you to watch all of them because it's very compelling evidence. And unless you're unable to drop your assumptions and adopt a scientific attitude where you're not sort of married to your assumptions and deeply psychologically invested in any given model, if you can sort of set that aside for a minute and just look at the data, look at the evidence as an objective observer, then, it's very simple and obvious truth. But it is difficult because, and I'm sad to say, that people like you make fun of it, even though in making fun of this, you're actually making fun of yourself.
And so, we didn't have GPS 20 years ago. The United States military didn't widely use, especially 30 years ago, there was no GPS.
Perhaps you need to study up on your history a bit, and I've mentioned this already, so I'll just cover it quickly, but Nikola Tesla invented technologies that were totally capable of supporting things like GPS, the internet, and even far more advanced things like transmitting electricity wirelessly using the natural magnetic flux lines that are generated by the Earth. For you to say that GPS wasn't available 20 years ago is extremely naive. Navigators have been using the Loran system for much longer than that, and the military has been using radio triangulation techniques for as long as radio frequencies and radio towers have been around, so since the 40s and the 50s and even probably before then. Also, I will tell you that the military always has technologies that are at least 20 to 50 years ahead of what the civilians have, and even of what the civilians are aware of. And I can tell you that before we had internet, the military had internet for decades. Before we had GPS, the military had GPS for decades. And, navigators at sea still use the Loran system. And so it's just extremely naive of you to assume that, for example, we need satellites to have GPS because we don't. Or we need satellites to have, predictive weather Doppler radar. The Doppler radar is a ground-based system, so weather maps, GPS, cell phones, they're all based on Tesla-based, tower-based, ground-based systems. And again, it's just totally naive and nonsensical to assume that the little plastic generic dish fixed to the side of your house is communicating with the satellite hundreds and hundreds of miles away. It's ridiculous. There's no evidence to support that theory. And so for you to basically just laugh at people and make fun of them for their stupid beliefs because you have these stupid beliefs, it really makes you sort of hypocritical, and it doesn't cast you in a very good light in terms of a researcher or a scientist. And again, I'm not picking on you here, but it's just, I'm being blunt. I deal with people day in and day out who think that they're so very smart because they know all about the programming, and yet, you're not making any sense here. You say the math doesn't work, but then where's the example? Can you give one example? I'm telling you that you can navigate on the flat Earth using those very same maps. If you look at the Mercator projection, which is basically what all of our maps are founded on, the definition of it is it's a cylindrical map, and all of the relative distances are skewed depending on your distance from the equator. The entire map Mercator projection is wrong. It's incorrect. It's not accurate. However, it still works because it's designed to maintain lines of constant course for navigators. That's what it was designed to do. It was designed to make sure that as long as people know how to navigate, they can use these maps to aid them in their navigation to improve their reckoning, to make sure they get where they're going. But to equate maps working only on a globe, do you see how ridiculous that is? You're basically saying that maps working is exclusive to the world being a spinning globe, which it absolutely is not. Maps work in either model, and the math works in either model.
GPS on board these ships. If you're a ship captain, if you're an admiral, if you're a midshipman, you're one of these officers, not even in just the U.S. Navy, but in the Maritime Sea Services, U.S. Merchant Marines, and all these other navies around the world, you navigated by hand. Because God forbid, if your GPS does go out, you got to find a way to get your boat home.
GPS on boats is the Loran system. It's an upgraded version of it, but they've been using that since long before there was ever such a thing as GPS. Furthermore, have you ever been on a ship at sea? I have. I've been on a few cruises, and I'm not saying I was in the Navy, but I've known lots of people that were in the Navy. Was I lying because I thought the Earth was a globe after I went on a ship? No. Again, you're not making any sense. You're assuming that people are a lot smarter than they actually are. And I'm not saying that people are all stupid, but we've all been tricked since we were gullible little toddlers, and hopefully if you don't get anything out of this little response to your video, you get that. Not everybody's lying. I don't think you're lying. I think you firmly believe that the Earth is a globe, but there's a sort of cognitive dissonance at work here that is designed to basically ostracize or shun people that disagree with your belief system, which proves that you're not actually investing your belief system in science as a process, but you're investing your belief system in scientism as a worldview or even as a religion. For you to shuck your responsibilities of decision making off to the smarter people that are scientists is a cop-out. You can do whatever you want, but I just can no longer blindly hand my decision making process over to people who claim to be much smarter and much more qualified than I am, because these people are all utterly and completely incorrect. That doesn't mean they're lying. That doesn't mean that every person that's ever been out to sea and did some navigating was lying. Again, it doesn't prove anything. It's very frustrating because you think that it does, but it actually doesn't.
You better know how to get from point A to point B. And folks, navigating this is a whole lot different when if you're navigating this.
See, it's that sort of statement that leads me to believe that you didn't actually research this as much as you think you did or as much as you claim to have researched it. In fact, navigating the flat Earth is very, very similar to navigating the globe Earth. So again, I sort of explained it before. Compass needles means picture the world as like a dartboard. The North Pole's in the center. The next ring out is the northern hemisphere. Next out is the southern hemisphere. Next out is the Antarctic. That's the ring around the outside with all the numbers in it. Now, if you're standing, say, in the 2 pi slice near the center somewhere, up and to the left would be north, and down and to the right would be south. If you're standing in the 9 pi slice, then down and to the right would be north, and up and to the left would be south. And any direction that is keeping north to your right would be west. And if you're traveling with north staying on your left would be east. Think of it this way: if you take that same dartboard and stick a thumbtack right in the bullseye, tie a string to the thumbtack and stretch the string out to the edge, and then fix, say, a little toy ship to the string, if you move the ship around keeping the string taut, that's going west to east on the flat Earth. And so I know it's sort of a bizarre thing to think about because it doesn't match what you've been led to believe your whole life, but navigating on the plane actually works. And here's the other kicker: the globe Earth doesn't work in reality. All of the oceans are supposedly compelled to curve around this giant ball because of gravity, and there would be a very simple way to calculate the expected curvature, which is 8 inches per mile squared. So if you're talking about 50 miles of ocean, then you should expect 50 times 50 times 8 inches, which would render the expected vertical curvature in that distance in inches. Another sort of easier way to do it would be 50 times 50 times 0.666666666 to infinity, which will render the result in feet. And again, that would be, vertical amount of curvature over a given distance. And the plain fact is no matter how hard you seek it, no matter how hard you try to find evidence for it, this curvature actually doesn't exist. And in case you didn't know the shape of a sphere, the world would necessarily have curvature if it was in fact a spinning sphere. So since the world doesn't have any curvature, then it couldn't possibly be a sphere. Therefore, the heliocentric model is wrong.
Navigating this is way different, because the math that it takes to navigate this is way different than what it takes to navigate this.
Nope, it's actually the exact same math. There is no difference, and it works in both models.
It's just, it's night and day. Look at this picture. It's South America and Australia are on two different sides of the planet. Two different sides of the planet. Whereas in a globe, they're just across the Pacific from one another.
Okay, so I know this is going to sound like sort of a cop-out, but I don't think any of the maps that we have are accurate. And the reason being is the azimuthal equidistant projection, or the Gleason standard map, which is similar to the one that you've got showing here. That map looks just too similar to the Mercator projection as far as I'm concerned. Again, by definition, the Mercator projection is skewed. It's inaccurate. It's designed to maintain the angles of the lines in terms of the land masses, and to maintain angles of constant course for navigators going across the sea, but it is not intended to be an accurate representation of the land masses and the relative distances involved. And so when we look at the flat Earth map that you're pointing to, I have problems with it. And I realize that a lot further study and scrutiny needs to go into map making and cartography, and we do have some good maps to point to. However, let's challenge you on something here. I dare you to try and find one single case of a person circumnavigating the globe from north to south. So going around the North Pole, going all the way down to the South Pole, coming up around the bottom and winding up back in the North Pole. With an airplane, or a fleet of airplanes, it should be very easy. But unfortunately, the only way you can circumnavigate this thing is from east to west, which is exactly how the Mercator projection was designed. Take a look at the Mercator projection map, and if you start on the left-hand side of the page and head west or left, you're going to pop back out on the right-hand side of the page, and that's essentially the crux of circumnavigation. It works going east to west. But if you go north from the top, you're not going to wind up back at the bottom. Now, this is because of the way that the map is designed, because it's cylindrical, but the thing is that Mercator knew, even back then in the 1500s, that the world could only possibly be circumnavigated from east to west. And, so to point to maps and pictures or drawings or representations of what people render the world to be in terms of navigation, it really doesn't prove anything. Now, there are some major issues with flight times, and I'm not going to get into all that here, but suffice to say that a westbound flight from New York to LA should be a far swifter flight than an eastbound flight returning from LA to New York, because you realize that the destinations below should constantly be racing about 750 miles per hour towards the east at that latitude. So that's a major issue with flight times involving the world not spinning and being very good proof of the world not spinning. But then you also have other issues with airplanes really avoiding the South Pole, especially like the plague. You've got to realize that back in the 1800s and even before then, mariners were really, really trying their damnedest to circumnavigate the southern hemisphere. And no matter how hard they tried, they just couldn't make their way all the way around of it. And if you actually take measurements from very southern city to city going all the way around the world, it turns out that there are many, many more miles in terms of circumference of latitude lines the further south you get of the equator. And so what's happening here is the longitude lines are not converging back into a point on the bottom of a sphere, you see. The latitude lines are getting wider and wider. They're wider and wider rings as you travel south of the equator. And I believe this is why only about 10% of the world's population lives in the southern hemisphere. And I also believe this is why the entire Antarctic Treaty was signed into law by your beloved world governments. The Antarctic Treaty basically keeps all corporations out, and I believe there are probably still some corporations there just striking it rich on all sorts of things. That's what greedy corporations do, is they take advantage of any situational advantage that they have, and they capitalize on that to everyone else's detriment, but to their obscene profit. The world governments are obviously subservient to these corporations because, especially now that America lives as a fascist corporate dictatorship, very similar to the Nazi regime. And that's whether you like it or not, that's the truth. So for you to just put so much faith into government and corporations is just extremely depressing.
But guys, the math doesn't work out.
Yes, the math actually does work out.
You're telling me that all these ship captains, all these admirals, all these midshipmen, all these people who navigated around the world and all the world's navies never figured out with their intelligence, their engineering backgrounds, because they've all been to college. These are, pretty, educated people.
I got to hand it to whomever is disseminating this deception, which includes you, unfortunately. But they've done an excellent job of convincing people that we live on a globe to a degree that even when standing on a stationary plane for their entire life, they'll never see evidence that's right in front of their face, right directly beneath their feet where they're standing. People just miss it. That includes pilots, that includes astronomers, that certainly includes seamen or mariners, sorry. Just don't see where you're going with this in terms of evidence. I mean, I guess I understand how you've rationalized this and you've basically cast aside your common sense observations, which is what we're trained to do, because we don't want to be lumped in with the crazy nut jobs
who think the earth is flat.
We want to be, or you want to be, part of the herd. You want to be correct. You want to be accepted by your peers. And so it is a very powerful delusion. And if you've ever read the Bible, I believe you probably have, but one of the main things that the New Testament warns us about is a great deception, a strong delusion that would deceive even the very elect, if that's even possible. And so we really need to be on our best defense. We need to be vigilant. We need to be wise as serpents, and of course, gentle as lambs. And to basically state that somebody would have figured this out by now as proof that what I'm saying doesn't exist is extremely naive. If there are 100 cattle getting ready to run off the side of the cliff, and one of the cattle in the middle says, "Hey, do you think we should slow down?" Do you think the rest of the cattle are going to slow down? And what are the consequences of that one cattle saying, maybe we should slow down? They're probably just going to trample over him, and they're all going to go over the side of the cliff anyway. And that's the problem I have with humans acting in a herd mentality sort of way. And it's also the issue I have with part of the herd becoming the herders for the wolves. And I'm sort of speaking in an analogy here, but essentially what I'm saying is by you failing to see the truth and by failing to actually do the research and the experimentation and just simply handing over your belief system or the foundation of your belief system to other men is problematic. It's going to get you into trouble.
You're telling me they never figured out all these years when they were taught that the world's a globe, and by doing the math by hand, they didn't figure out the earth was flat?
Why are you so stuck on that point? No, they didn't figure it out. Did you figure it out? Even when people are showing it to you and explaining to you how the world couldn't possibly be a globe, you still can't figure it out. So what makes you think that any other person that was reared on planet Earth would figure it out just because they navigated the seas. It doesn't make any sense, and I guess I'm probably harping on this point too much, but I'm just responding to what you're saying. Again, the maps work. Maps work on the flat Earth. The Earth was flat forever, and maps have always worked. The only way that maps work on a globe is if you skew the distances around. Don't you remember from geography class how your teacher would tell you that,
The map is hard to get right because the Earth is actually a globe.
okay, so we'll give them that, and we'll say that it's difficult to transpose a spherical object. It's hard to transpose the face of that spherical object onto a two-dimensional surface, and that's granted. However, why is it so difficult to get the relative distances and sizes correct on a little globe? Shouldn't everything just scale down evenly? Why can't they get it right on a globe? And if the maps are so skewed and, incorrect, then why does the globe look exactly like those maps? The fact that maps work doesn't prove anything. Maps will work in either model. I'm not going to say that the maps working proves the flat Earth, because maps wouldn't work on a globe, which they wouldn't. But again, it's not proof. You can look at this a couple of different ways, and it works in either model. We really need to sort of get down to brass tacks and get down to empirical evidence that we can, scrutinize and verify and furthermore falsify. Finally, and I'll get back to your diatribe, but the assertion that maps only work on a globe is preposterous. This is similar to the argument that when I drop my pen, it falls to the ground. Therefore, we live on a spinning globe. If you can see the incomplete logic involved here, it's very comical once you actually realize the truth. Things fall to the ground on the flat Earth, okay? Maps work on the flat Earth. Circumnavigation works on the flat Earth. Everything works on the flat Earth because the Earth is a stationary plane. Theoretically, things can work on the globe model, but it's all just theory.
Come on. Seriously? Guys, one of the big arguments that I found compelling until it was completely debunked was when Mark Sargent said you can't find a flight from Sydney, Australia to Santiago, Chile.
Okay, now I'm not going to turn this video into a bash Mark Sargent festival, but not everything that Mark Sargent says is true. Not everything that Mark Sargent says is an accurate representation of the flat Earth. And furthermore, not everything Mark Sargent says is what all flat earthers believe. Mark Sargent has a point of view from a game designer's standpoint, and so there are some things that he describes that are very, very different than the way that I would describe them. But for you to say that Mark Sargent pointed out these flights, which it actually is a pretty compelling point that he had. There are people that claim to have made those flights, and perhaps they have, but again, this only proves that the maps that we have are incorrect. Nobody, as far as I'm concerned, who says that we have a 100% accurate map, anybody who says that is either lying or they're just ill-informed. The Mercator projection's wrong. Even the azimuthal equidistant map is probably wrong. But we have to have maps that work in order for navigation to work. But that's it. And until I book a flight from Santiago, Chile, going south around the South Pole and landing in, on the other side of the world somewhere, that would probably be some degree of proof for me that the maps are totally wrong. But the Earth still isn't a spinning globe. That's irrelevant. The basic logical, factual evidence proves all of this, and the bottom line to all this is that whether or not planes can make the flight is irrelevant, and even if you could make that flight, which you'd expect to see at a very popular flight, because those are two pretty major cities, but it's apparently so expensive that most people don't even take the flight, and it's hard to book, and you end up getting transferred around from what I gather. But even if you could, or even if you can indeed fly from those 2 points, it doesn't prove anything but the fact that our maps are wrong, and that's a given. That's granted. We know the maps are wrong. That includes the mainstream maps like the Mercator projection, and of course, probably most of the flat Earth maps are not 100% accurate in terms of realistically showing what the continents look like and the relative distances involved. But it's still important to have maps, and the maps do indeed work, but a map working and a map being a 100% accurate depiction of the world, those are two different things, and hopefully you understand the difference.
Folks, you can go on Orbitz right now and find flights from Sydney, Australia, or Auckland, New Zealand, non-stop to Santiago, Chile, in 11 to 13 hours, depending on which flight it is. 11 to 13 hours.
You must cut down the mightiest tree in the forest with a herring.
We shall do no such thing.
Oh, please.
Cut down a tree with a herring? It can't be done.
Okay, so what you've done right there is you've allegedly disproved a red herring argument. You've debunked the straw man, or you've hung and maimed the effigy, allegedly. Now, from what I've heard, people that actually book those flights don't ever get on them, and if they do get on them, they end up transferring all over the place anyways. But hypothetically, even if people take that flight all the time, which is possible, it doesn't mean that the Earth is a spinning globe by any stretch of the imagination. But let's just say hypothetically that Mark Sargent was wrong. Let's say that what he was pointing to was absolutely not proof of the world's shape or nature whatsoever, which it wasn't. The way he presented it certainly lent credence to the model, and as far as I'm concerned, there still may be something to it, but let's just, because again, pilots always avoid the southernmost region like the plague when it should be a shortcut to all sorts of destinations on the quote-unquote globe. But let's just say Mark Sargent was incorrect, and you've basically debunked the flat Earth because you've debunked a falsity. That doesn't prove anything to me, and it really doesn't add up, and it again shows that your chain of logic is incomplete or flawed. If you're not familiar with a red herring argument, let me give you an example. Let's say I go and commit a crime, and as I'm escaping the crime scene, a police officer asks me, "Did you see who shot the clerk?" And I'm just pulling something out of my cousin Vinny.
At NYU, and we both applied, and we got scholarships to UCLA. So we figured the weather and the scenery would be nicer going to the south.
What about the tuna fish?
Then I forgot about the can of tuna fish, and then we left.
Did he catch you with tuna fish? Is that how it started?
No, he didn't say anything.
But he knew about it.
I don't know.
Let's talk about that for a moment. You paid for the groceries. And then what?
We went out to the car, and that's it.
When'd you shoot him?
What?
So if the police officer asked me, "Did you see who shot the clerk?" And I said, "Yeah, he was the guy that had blue shoes. He ran that way." Well, if someone else came along and basically told the same police officer that the guy had red shoes, then if I'm wearing yellow shoes, does that prove I didn't shoot the clerk? What does that prove? It's a red herring, it's a non-argument, and by disproving a non-argument, you don't disprove anything realistic. That's why red herring arguments are irrelevant, but it's also why we should leave out conjecture from anything that we call proof. Now, I've never been on a flight from Santiago, Chile to Sydney, Australia. People claim to have been on it, and if that's the case, all that it tells me is that our maps are wrong, which is something that I've been saying for quite some time. It's actually provable, and if you take the time to watch some of my videos, you'll see that it is actually demonstrable, it's provable that our maps are wrong. It's also, by that same token, by that same proof, we can prove that NASA's been faking their images of the continents. Again, if the Mercator map is by definition skewed, and the images that we get back from NASA look exactly like the images on the Mercator map, it proves that NASA is not being honest. It proves they're lying.
So that debunk, and it's funny but now because this has taken on so much steam. You know, Mark Sargent's video has been seen by so many people, and the other flat earther guys' videos have been seen by so many people that pilots and people have actually gone and gotten on these flights and taken the flights just to see. And there's a website called Metabunk out there that talks about the flat Earth quite a bit. And there was a pilot who got in there and says, "Hey, yeah, I've heard these flat earthers, and they say that I can't fly from Sydney, Australia to Santiago, Chile. That's funny because I just got off a flight where I flew the plane."
And, we'll go ahead and give you this one because indeed it is irrelevant, but technically that's hearsay. And if you're familiar with a court of law, hearsay amounts to, well, basically nothing because, and I'm not necessarily questioning that pilot's integrity, but at the same time, you can't just gobble up what people say as factual. That's sort of what's gotten us into this whole mess, this massive misunderstanding in the first place, is people relinquishing their decision-making process over to others who profess to be wise.
In 11 hours or whatever it was. And so this stuff is completely disproven because here's the deal. There's a big distance issue when you go from this map to this map. There's a huge difference when it comes to distance and flight time. And so all their theories, these flat earthers are rolling out there about how you can't get a flight. It's crazy. That's wrong, and it's been disproven over and over again.
See, here's the problem with this bit of evidence that we're kicking around here. The flat Earth map that you're looking at has the two continents, South America and Australia, on opposite ends of the map. But technically, it could still work in either model where you've got those two continents not nearly as distant. The reason why they have it mapped out like this is because they experience day and night as polar opposites of one another. Now, of course, you realize in the globe model this is because they're on other sides of the sphere. On the flat Earth model, it's because they're on other sides of the North Pole. Now, that works in theory, and there are some problems with it. What we experience as day and night is just simply the light from the sun either being within our eye shot or not within our eye shot, and the behavior of light, how it bends and how it refracts around different types of media such as electromagnetic fields, ionized plasma in the magnetosphere, atmosphere. It's sort of I wouldn't say that the light is skewed, which it is, but we as observers are also skewed, or the way that we observe reality is skewed. And, just look at the laws of perspective, and that's one example. Distant objects don't actually get smaller and smaller. They just appear that way because they're further from us, and it makes perfect sense logically, but you can't reach out and touch something that's very, very far away, obviously. But again, the object doesn't actually get smaller and smaller as it gains distance from you. It just appears that way. And the fact that South America experiences daytime, on the polar opposite of the so-called world, it's really just the behavior of light. And we're finding more and more evidence that the firmament, quote unquote, isn't any sort of glass dome. I believe that the stars in the sky are on an astral plane, and there's probably not any sort of dome. However, there is almost definitely an electromagnetic field emanating from the center of the map and jutting out south in all directions to the southern region, essentially like an electromagnetic bubble around the entire Earth. But I'm beginning to think more and more that it's a vortex toroidal shape, or sort of like half a donut with the center being above the North Pole, the center of the dartboard. And this makes a whole lot of sense when you look at the way the sun behaves, because you've got things like the 24 hours of daylight in the Antarctic, supposedly, and this actually matches up very nicely with this electromagnetic field toroidal shape theory. There's definitely a lot of theory involved with the flat Earth model, but the tenets of it are fundamentally provable, and that's why we're not round Earthers anymore, is because the heliocentric model doesn't work. I'm not going to go into all the proofs here in this video, but I'll go ahead and put some cards to a couple suggested videos here in case you haven't seen it. I've got some really great proof that goes far beyond any of the arguments that you've even mentioned here, so we'll continue.
Anyway, that's my thing number 3. I mean, they even have, you can't fly over Antarctica. There's companies now, tourist companies out there that are taking tourists to Antarctica.
Yeah, and this is really sort of another one of those red herring arguments. I mean, it is and it isn't. First of all, nobody's saying that Antarctica doesn't exist. There's certainly an ice wall around the flat Earth, and it's called Antarctica. In the globe Earth model, obviously, it's a continent situated at the bottom of a sphere. But here's the deal with that. You can go to Antarctica for scientific research purposes only, and you have to be on a guided tour. You have to have the permission, or whoever's, captain of the voyage or whatever, has to have permission of the Antarctic Board and essentially the world military powers, and especially whichever world military power happens to own that little pie slice of the Antarctic. So it is naive of you to say that you can just go to the Antarctic, because you can't. First of all, most people simply don't have the means. You have to have a pretty sturdy vessel to go all the way out there, and the thing is you can't even bring or store excess fuel down there, so if you make it down there, you're not going to make it back. And you'll probably end up getting turned away, because unless you have essentially a green light from the bodies that I've just mentioned, they'll stop you. You're not supposed to go there without permission. And I submit that the reason for that is because if we actually could go there and we had the means to do it, and lots of people went in all directions south, it would quickly become very apparent that we're not on the bottom of a sphere. And there's a ton of evidence to support this. If you just look, for example, at the barometric pressure of the world, it's at its highest at the center, or at the North Pole, and it gradually decreases. The barometric pressure does, lower and lower and lower, until you get to the equator. Now, you'd expect, if we lived on a sphere, for that barometric pressure to start increasing again as you travel south of the equator, but instead, what it does is it continues to get lower and lower. Furthermore, and I've already mentioned this, but mariners in the 1800s that were free to roam about the southern hemisphere and weren't compelled by the shortcut of the Panama Canal to, avoid going all the way around the bottom South America. But, the mariners prior to all of this, when there were still a lot of flat earthers out there, it's not just 500 years ago thinking. This was being debated even in the 1800s. But they found that the southern latitudes were far, far larger than even the equator. So those two things, the barometric pressure not beginning to gradually increase as you travel south of the equator, as you would expect, since that's what it does in the northern hemisphere. Also, the southern polar region, so to speak, and the northern polar region are different as day and night. For example, the southernmost region is by far colder on average and by record than the northern polar region, and there is no indigenous wildlife, and it's just so inhospitable. The northern sort of has a milder summer. Also, the twilight hours are different in each hemisphere. The twilight is a very quick, sudden thing, and it comes very swiftly and goes very swiftly in the southern latitudes. However, in the north, the twilight hours sort of linger around. So just the major differences between the northern hemisphere and the southern hemisphere show and support the idea that there isn't this bilateral symmetry going on that you would necessarily have on a spherical Earth. So, we're not just blowing this stuff out our rear.
And dropping people off, and science programs that you can sign up for and participate in Antarctica. You can go there. Oh, but it's all off limits, Zach. You're not allowed to go there. U.S. government has signed deals with all these other nations where nobody can go there except for their governments and do experiments, secret experiments that nobody knows about and they're not telling anybody about. That's garbage. People are all, you can find YouTube videos of people, teenagers going there and going there for a field trip.
So do you think the teenagers that went there on a field trip did so on their own volition, on their own accord? Well, I'll tell you for sure that it was a guided tour situation. You can go to the so-called South Pole, and what they've done is just picked an arbitrary point on the northernmost point on the southernmost region, and they just stick a barbershop pole there and say that's the South Pole. But nobody's actually ever been to the South Pole, where you could essentially walk around in a circle and you'd be facing north no matter which way you looked. Nobody's ever done that, and so the South Pole is very elusive. Now, people have been very close to the North Pole, and you can go there a little bit more freely, whereas finding full-on panoramic view of the midnight sun in the Antarctic is a little bit more difficult to find, and the only one that I've ever seen was obviously a hoax. It had all sorts of problems with it.
It's laughable. And so, all right, I'm not, listen, guys, I'm not trying to make fun of you. I'm just trying to tell you how ridiculous this whole thing is.
Oh, you have no idea how ridiculous it is. We're getting towards the end here, and the only thing that I've seen you do is basically laugh about how stupid you think people are who believe the Earth isn't a spinning globe. At least you're apologizing, because that's sort of redeeming, and I appreciate that. But I could very well laugh and giggle about how gullible and stupid you are, but I'm not going to do that. Again, we're all very familiar since we were very young with the alleged proofs of the world being a sphere. And the problem is everybody has sort of been forced into believing this one single thing. And if you even talk or theorize outside of this conventional wisdom, you get ostracized, and people laugh at you thinking they're so much smarter than you. But again, if you actually take the time and you're dedicated to the truth, and you're able to shed the assumptions and sort of put your brainwashing on hold, even just for theoretical hypotheses, that's the only way that you can even begin to understand the truth, because otherwise it's just so far removed from what we've been taught as correct our entire lives. You're rendered incapable of seeing the truth when it's right in front of your face, and it is a bit frustrating, and it's a little bit sad.
Zach, what about the Bible? We'll get there at the end. But the whole, just from a common sense perspective, I'm not trying to make fun of you. I'm just trying to show you some common sense. This is crazy. Crazy. Anyway.
What's crazy is you think that you've debunked the truth because you debunked a red herring argument from Mark Sargent. And I'm not even sure you debunked that. But, and I think you go into some proofs here at the end, so I'll try to be brief on each one of those. But I hope that you're able to look at this again and look at this with your own eyes, with your own brain. Don't even listen to me. Don't listen to anyone. Listen to yourself. Look through your own eyes. Do your own experimentation. Ask questions to nature. The best questions to nature are asked in the form of experiments, and she always answers concisely and clearly, but you have to follow the data. You have to follow the scientific method, or the zetetic process, which simply means to proceed only according to inquiry. So if you're not sure about something, then instead of asking, what different people think about it, do your own experiments and decide and know for yourself for sure the answer. And with the technologies that we have today, there's certain things that we still can't prove, but there's a great deal of very conclusive evidence that we can scrutinize and repeat and verify using this type of method. So hopefully you're able to do that.
So they're doing tours in Antarctica. You got flights going over there, and you got all these pilots out there saying, "Hey, I just flew." It's crazy. Number 3, the math doesn't work out. It's completely off. The math doesn't work.
I'm not sure what sort of math you're doing here. You haven't really mentioned any math at all. You pointed to a book that you had from junior high about navigating manually, but just because you don't understand the math or just because you say the math doesn't work, that doesn't prove anything. I can tell you several bits of math that work in either model, and I can also tell you some very clear math that doesn't work in the globe model. One example is, again, the 8 inches per mile squared of curvature. You can see lighthouses from 50 and 60 and 70 miles away, depending on the altitude of the lighthouse, and that has to do with the laws of perspective. But if we lived on a spherical Earth with the circumference of 25,000 miles, such lighthouses would be based thousands of feet beneath the horizon line, and you simply couldn't see them. So that right there proves there's no curvature. Another fundamental thing about water is it always finds its level. Nowhere in nature can you find water wrapping around a ball, and furthermore, no matter how hard you look for it, and water would be the best medium, especially standing water, but no matter how hard you look for it and seek it with experiments, you can never ever find one single degree of curvature.
Number 4. Number 4 reason why the Earth is a globe, the Earth is round, is light.
Light. Therefore, the Earth is a globe. Yes, that makes perfect sense. No, I'm kidding. Hopefully, you're going to bust out the ace in the hole, light.
So here is Rob Skiba's model. This is the model he made in a 3D program like Poser or whatever it was. And basically, the sun is going around the Earth. And this is how he speculates that the sun works, because people ask, say, so Zach, how does the sun, how can it be light in China and dark in the U.S. and then light in the U.S. and dark in China? How does that work?
I think Rob Skiba's animation is pretty good just as a representation of how the model sort of works. But again, light is sort of a fickle thing, and our ability to observe it is also a bit skewed since we are such tiny little biased observers. If you look at the animation here, this is actual data taken from time and date, as well as observations taken in New York City on the 21st of each month of the sun at high noon for a year. And this actually seems to me, and I'm not talking about the map here, we're looking at the day and night, which is sort of interesting because you can see how light, it doesn't necessarily behave in such a way that you would expect in terms of being, identical all the way around. It sort of acts differently depending on the angle that it's hitting this ostensibly electromagnetic field, and the light sort of behaves erratically. It doesn't just go straight down, and that's sort of a misconception that we have, that light only travels, in a straight line from the sun to our eye, when in fact light is compelled to bend wildly, even in the globe Earth model, but definitely in the flat Earth model, it becomes clear that the behavior of the light from the sun is something that definitely needs a lot further scrutiny, because there's something that we're missing here. Now, I think that this model here shows that it certainly does work in the flat Earth model in terms of the midnight sun in the Antarctic. But if you also figure in, and I definitely want to see some vortex-based mathematics applied to this in a more comprehensive manner. I'm still learning the basics of it, but Randy Powell had discovered or cracked the code to vortex-based mathematics, and it just really makes so much sense to me, and I think that what we're observing here on the ground could very easily be mapped out and modeled using this vortex-based mathematics. But furthermore, I think that the natural reality is constructed, or very possibly is constructed around such a divine code of nature. So again, to say that the sun is just like a little spotlight doesn't do it justice because there's more to it than that.
You know, how if it's a flat Earth, because wouldn't the sun light everything up at once? Well, this is the model that Rob put together to show that, you know, basically this is how it works. The sun, the light of the sun only shines so far. But see, that's not how reality works either. This is not how reality works. This is not how light works. This is how it works in a 3D program. You're talking to a guy who has a degree in 3D animation. I went to Full Sail University. I got 2 degrees from that school. One of the degrees was computer animation, and one of the courses that I took in that degree program was called shading and lighting.
Okay, so again, I understand that Full Sail is a good school for the arts. I don't remember it being that great of a school in terms of the sciences, but you know, Mark Sargent tends to describe the flat Earth model from a game designer standpoint, and it seems to me that you know, tend to look at things from a game designer standpoint, and you know, poking holes into the specific model that is used by Rob Skiba, or specifically how light behaves in Rob Skiba's theoretical model. Poking holes in that sort of thing doesn't necessarily prove the world to be a spinning ball. Again, one of those sort of red herring arguments. And I realize that I may be coming across as rather stubborn about this, but again, I've been through the last 7 months really trying to find proof of a spherical Earth, and really all I can find is conjecture, assumptions, hyperbole, chest beating, infighting, and ultimately just a huge misunderstanding in terms of people who cling to the ball.
And when you take a program called Maya, which I used to use, Maya and 3D Studio Max, you can create light emitters in those programs, and you can control how far the distance is that light shines in that computer program, in that 3D program. So if you only want to shine part of your scene up with that light emitter, you can control how far that light affects the scene that you're working in.
Therefore, the Earth is a spinning globe, right?
And so that's what Rob has done here to create this effect with this animation. But that's not how light works. That's how light works in a 3D program. But that's not how light works in reality.
Agreed, definitely agreed. And, you know, now that I've been sitting here listening to you, did you go to school in Central Florida in the 90s? I don't know, or have a brother that did? Because you seem very familiar.
Case in point are fiber optic cables. You can send instantaneous messages and data through the Pacific Ocean where it's light on one end and dark on the other.
Wait, what? What does that have to do with anything? Fiber optic cables, you can send light through the fiber optic cables from one end of the Earth to the other. Okay, so wait a minute. So you're saying that the speed of light is proof of a spinning globe? Because scientists can, you know, accurately measure the speed of light. I believe it's constantly slowing down over time, but yeah, the speed of light, we have cables, fiber optic cables, and therefore we live on a spinning globe? I don't get it. Maybe you'll tie that in somehow.
Instantly, through light. That's how we send data now. There are tons of fiber optic cables all throughout the planet that encircle the planet, and the longest ones are in the Pacific. And I know some of you guys, but Zach, those fiber optic cables carry repeaters.
Okay, and with or without repeaters, what exactly are you talking about? This doesn't even make any sense. One thing that I will tell you is that if we actually had satellites up there beaming back and forth all that data, we wouldn't need to run those fiber optic cables, Zach. We've got them going all over the place underneath the oceans, but around a globe, that doesn't even make any sense.
To make sure the signal reaches the other end. Actually, it's true, they do have repeaters, but it's not to make sure the light gets to the other end. The light will get to the other end, but because of the enormous pressures under the ocean with the sea, it gets distorted. And so they have to have repeaters to make sure that because of the pressures, the signal stays completely intact. However, great piece of information, University of San Diego just this year in 2015 has discovered a way to have no repeaters in a fiber optic line where you just send the light from point A to point B up to 12,000 kilometers, and then they just allow the distortion to happen underneath the ocean, and then they can predict how the distortion reacts, and they just put it back together at the other end.
That's fairly interesting, and it's always nice to know trivia, but I'm still failing to see how this relates to proof of a globe. They're improving the technology of the light that passes through the fiber optic cables. Therefore, we live on a globe. Okay, yeah, I got it.
No more need for repeaters. Instantaneous light travel carrying data. 12,000 kilometers. Oh, let's see. I think from Beijing to Washington, D.C., it's less than 11,000 kilometers. 11,000 kilometers. So you're saying it's light in one area and dark in another, and your sun only travels light from point A to point B.
Okay, so wait a minute, let me get this straight. You're basically trying to insinuate that a fiber optic cable is the exact same thing as the atmosphere? I don't get it. Sure, we can force light down a fiber optic cable, but how does that relate to the sun? That doesn't even make any sense. You should probably look at the flat earth model and consider, even being a pioneer in this, because you've obviously got some level of intelligence and some technical experience, but there is a lot of mystery involved with, how light propagates. Recently discovered there's plasma tubes, which is ionized gases in the lower magnetosphere. These were discovered by Cleo Loy at the University of Sydney. She's a legitimate astrophysicist, undergraduate student, discovered these plasma tubes in the lower magnetosphere, but the light is passing through all of these, different media, and it's certainly behaving differently, but I wouldn't liken any of that to a fiber optic cable. A fiber optic cable is an invention. It's not anything natural that you find in nature, in the world.
I know it can only travel so far. Whereas when you put light through a fiber optic cable, which is just basically glass, it shines forever with no stop.
Okay, Mr. Smarty Pants, I'm going to do what's called research. You probably never heard of it, but here's a little bit of information on optical fiber. An optical fiber, or fiber optic cable, is a flexible, transparent fiber. Oh, source on this is Wikipedia, by the way. It is a pretty good source on some things sometimes. Flexible, transparent fiber made by drawing glass or silica or plastic to a diameter slightly thicker than that of a human hair. Optical fibers are used most often as a means to transmit light between the two ends of the fiber and find wide usage in fiber optic communications, where they permit transmission over longer distances and at higher bandwidths or data rates than wire cables. Fibers are used instead of metal wires because signals travel along them with lesser amounts of loss. In addition, fibers are also immune to electromagnetic interference, a problem from which metal wires suffer excessively. Fibers are also used for illumination and are wrapped in bundles so that they may be used to carry images, thus allowing viewing in confined spaces, as in the case of a fiberscope. Now, you'll notice that one of the characteristics, or a couple of the characteristics of fiber optics, is it essentially manipulates light to travel much further distances than it would, because you don't have things like refraction, electromagnetic interference. There's, like I was trying to explain before, there are all sorts of natural elements to the world. There's sort of an aura generated by the world that is an electromagnetic field, and this is actually distorted, and all sorts of wild things happen up in the magnetosphere, apparently. But the atmosphere, refraction, and there's just all sorts of things that don't allow light to just, continuously propagate. Depending on the medium that you use, different types of waves will propagate differently, and that's one of the things that science is certainly good for, is to find better ways of transmitting data. So we certainly are. I'm not certainly against science by any means, but I think it's a bit premature to take fiber optic cables as somehow proving something. I don't even know what you're trying to prove, really. I guess you're trying to prove that the sky is made of fiber optic cables, I reckon. Or no, you're trying to prove that the sky isn't made of fiber optic cables. So I guess that's probably true.
This model I mean, I love you, Rob. I do. But this model is absolutely not reality. It is not science. It's based on your opinion because you want it to be true. When in reality, that sun is 93 million miles away. It's not 3,000 miles above the Earth. It's actually a giant gaseous glowing orb called a star. It's called our sun. And it, even while it's the same size as the moon.
Okay, well, I've already shown that the sun can be mathematically proven to be about 3 or 4,000 miles away, and it can be mathematically proven to be about 93 million miles away. The only reason that you get the two wildly different answers is by either A, assuming that the Earth is a plane, and just simply using Euclidean geometry or trigonometry, and on the other hand, if you assume that the world is a sphere with a circumference of 25,000 miles and take the same numbers, the same measurements, the same data, and just complicate the algorithm or complicate the equation and assume the Earth is a sphere, then you get the nonsensical number of 93 million miles away. Furthermore, you're asserting something that is totally theoretical, as if you've ever walked up to the sun and kicked it or something. Nuclear fusion is very much theoretical. The sun is supposedly made up mainly of hydrogen and helium, and through a process that's never been demonstrated and never been proven, they say that it creates light. I hate to say this, but there are some other very compelling hypotheses for what the sun and the other stars are. Even though the sun may be completely different from the other stars, they may be similar. That's still up for debate. But the thing is it appears that they are not nuclear fusion. Nuclear fusion, again, is something that sort of makes sense in an Einsteinian universe, but relativity leaves a lot to be begged for when you realize that there is no infinite space and the Earth isn't a globe. Relativity is very wildly theoretical. It involves, the possibility of black holes and Einstein-Rosen bridges, and, the sun. Maybe this is a little bit outside of relativity, but the sun being the largest gravity generator in our neighborhood, being made up of the lightest compounds known. Helium, floats in a balloon, yet the sun burns helium and hydrogen forever. Oh, well, no, it doesn't burn it. It does nuclear fusion, which is theoretical fantasy at this point.
When you look at it from your perspective, it's gigantic compared to the Earth and compared to the moon. It's not reality what you're teaching people about the light shining, and it's disproven by fiber optic cables.
I agree that the way that the light's behaving on that model probably isn't 100% accurate, but, I think it's irrelevant. You haven't proven that the Earth isn't a spinning globe because of fiber optic cables. All you've proven is that the sky isn't made of fiber optic cables. Again, that's a wild leap of logic that is totally incomplete and fallacious. I like Rob Skiba's work. I don't necessarily agree with that model that you're pointing to 100%, neither the map nor the behavior of the sun, but it is important that we have, demonstrations and animations to sort of explain people how the idea we're describing works. But there is a lot of observations that need to be made and a lot of calculations that need to be checked, double-checked, and refined. And I believe eventually we'll have a very accurate and complex working model, but this is still very much in its infancy, and we need more professional, intelligent, capable, technically able people helping us out with this. Hell, even if you're a globe earther, science is supposed to involve testing hypotheses, and part of that does indeed involve making models. So, I hope that you are able to jump on board with science as opposed to staying blindly dogmatic in the religion of scientism.
And so any of these guys who are teaching this stuff, fiber optic cables, there's thousands of studies out there, university studies, that show how light reacts and how light can be measured. It travels at 300,000 kilometers per second. The speed of light. Light travels, well, at the speed of light. So, reason number 4 why the Earth is round, light.
Honestly, I don't want to beat a dead horse, but the number 4 reason that the Earth is round is light. No, I would say the number 1 reason that the sky isn't fiber optic cables is Zach.
Oh, but I mean, unless all of the university studies, Harvard, Yale, I mean, they're all skull and bones. They're all NASA, NSA plants. All of those light studies are fake, and those fiber optic cables probably don't exist anyway under the ocean. It's all a gag.
Since you're so into light studies, I suggest you look at a couple of them. One of them would be Airy's failure, and one of them would be the Michelson-Morley experiments. I'll just sort of describe Airy's failure real quick because this is a very important observation that was done by a scientist, a royal astronomer named Airy. You can just look it up. But essentially, Airy was trying to prove the globe Earth. He wanted to show that the Earth was spinning and the stars are essentially stationary, more or less. And if you actually look at the experiment called Airy's failure, he was trying to prove that, by filling the telescope with water, light slows down when it goes through water. If you have to tip it a certain degrees, that proves that the Earth is spinning. But the reason that they call it Airy's failure, and you can look this up, I'm not going to explain the whole thing. I actually covered it in one of my videos. But the reason they call it Airy's failure is because it proved that the Earth and the telescope were stationary, and it is the starlight and or the ether that is spinning. And so they don't teach this in any textbooks, but if you show this data to anybody that knows their physics and astronomy, will tell you if they would have been taught this when they were in college, they probably would have reconsidered the heliocentric model. The Michelson-Morley the Michelson-Morley experiment actually takes this a step further, and I'm not going to get into all that here. It's beyond the scope of this video, but I suggest you look at those, and there's actually some other very well-known, well-documented experiments with light that prove that not only is the speed of light slowing down over time, but it also proves, under careful observation and documentation, that the Earth is stationary and the celestial bodies are indeed spinning overhead along with the ether.
And they're all in on it. It's a giant conspiracy.
They're all in on it as much as you're in on it, Zach. They're all in on it since they were toddlers. They're all in on the PSYOP. They're all in on the Great Deception. And for you to make fun of people for pointing out that all of you people are wrong and you've been incorrect, and I was incorrect about this for my whole life too, but no, they're not in on it. They're duped. They're snowed. They've had the wool pulled over their eyes since they were toddlers by a blind faith in the religion of scientism and ultimately heliocentrism, which boils down to the worship of the sun.
Vantage points. Number 5. The number 5 reason why the Earth is a globe is vantage points. You see 2 different views of the moon in the south than you do in the north. So if you're in the south, if you're in Australia and you look up at the moon, you see a different view than the guy who's standing up in Idaho looking at the moon.
Oh, dear God, I can't believe that you actually came out with this one. Wow, the Earth must be a globe. Let's pack up our stuff and go home. Really? If you look at the flat Earth model, somebody standing in opposite facing the moon, they're going to see exactly what they see. They're looking at the moon from different directions. Now, if the moon was a globe and the Earth was a globe, and the moon might still be a globe, but let's just hypothesize here. Let's just say they're both globes. And if you're standing on one hemisphere looking south from the north, and in the other southern hemisphere looking north from the south, and you're looking up at the moon, you're going to see the moon from different perspectives, of course, but the person in the south would actually see a totally different face of the moon. But in fact, those 2 people will see the identical image, only one is reversed. Now, furthermore, if you actually observe the moon through the night with a time-lapse camera, it turns like a wheel through the sky as it moves. You can't see it with the naked eye, but again, if you observe it with time-lapse over the course of an evening, it does indeed rotate like a wheel in the sky. But if two people can see the moon from, vastly separate locations on the Earth, they're going to be looking up from two different vantage points, and so it's completely obvious why they would see a reversed image. That doesn't prove the Earth is a globe at all. If you stick a coin on your ceiling and the coin's got its head towards you, and then you walk to the other end of the room and look up at the coin, and then his neck is towards you, does that mean that your room is a globe?
Different moons. Why? Because you're on a globe. You're on a round planet. You see two different vantage points from north to south.
Honestly, if you weren't so arrogant and condescending about all this, I never would have made this video. I just get very upset by people who are totally incorrect, going around flaunting it like they're some sort of genius.
Now, the guys in the north, if you're on, Beijing, and you see the moon, and the guy in Idaho sees the moon the next day or that evening, well, you see the same moon. Same moon, but north to south, you see a different moon. You see a different perspective of that moon. Also, I think which is the nail in the coffin on the flat Earth theory is this right here. When you start spinning, when the Earth is spinning, and you look from the northern hemisphere at the stars above, they spin in a counterclockwise direction. If you're standing in South America or in Australia and you look at the stars up above, they spin in a completely different direction. They spin clockwise.
Really? So you're going to point to essentially the same principle as we just went over with the moon. I have to tell you, man, this doesn't work in the globe model. Okay, so the stars overhead are all orbiting in concentric rings around the North Pole, which is fixed to the center of the map, and we are stationary. So whether you agree with this or not, it's a viable position to at least scrutinize scientifically, but to dismiss an idea that you don't like is the opposite of scientific. The scientific method would dictate to test all avenues of hypotheses to ultimately determine the truth. In the same direction, it's, depending on if you're looking up at them or looking down on the map, it's going to be opposite directions, of course. But if you're in the northern hemisphere facing north in the flat Earth model, and you look up at the stars and they're traveling clockwise around the North Pole star, and then if you turn around and head south, or to the equator, not even that far, and look south, then the stars are going to be orbiting in right to left fashion, or counterclockwise. So it's just about the way you're looking up. That's all it is. You really haven't taken the time to consider this observation in the flat Earth model properly, and you obviously haven't taken the time to, or allowed the skepticism for the globe Earth model that's critical, just simply because that is what you've believed your whole life. So those two observations, the one about the moon and the one about the stars orbiting in opposite directions depending on the hemisphere, but neither one of those are proof of a globe. Those two observations actually work in the flat Earth model.
Counterclockwise in the north and clockwise in the south. That's because you're on a globe. You're on a ball. That alone proves that you're on a ball. You know what? You can test this at home. Try this out.
Okay, and I will assert, no, it doesn't. It doesn't prove anything. But let's hear the experiment.
Go in your living room and start turning left. Start spinning left and look up. And see which direction a spot on your ceiling is moving. And then, as you're moving left, look down. Your floor will be spinning in the exact opposite direction.
Okay, let's get this one thing straight. If you're in the northern hemisphere facing north, even as far south as Capricorn, you can see the North Pole star, which actually proves the world is a plane. It couldn't be a sphere, being how you can see the North Pole star from as far south as Capricorn. But there's all sorts of problems with the North Pole star maintaining its alignment with our rotational axis. But that's sort of besides the point. If you look at the stars, the time-lapse camera, and focus your telescope on the North Pole star, all of the northern stars make concentric rings around the North Pole star. Now, here's the deal. All of the southern stars actually do the same thing. They make concentric rings around the North Star. They do not, absolutely do not, make concentric rings around any sort of southern pole star. That's a myth. If you can even find an image or an animation of the southern pole star, then kudos to you, because you simply can't find anything like that. But if you can get time-lapsed images of the southern stars, they absolutely do not behave like the northern stars. The fact that they're going in different directions depending on whether you're facing north or south, that's irrelevant. It's just the way you're looking up. It doesn't change. It doesn't mean you're on a globe. It's just changing your perspective. So again, just totally incomplete logic, wild assertions, and a complete fundamental misunderstanding of the true correct flat Earth model, and just simply blind swallowing hook, line, and sinker of the globe Earth programming.
You look up, you're spinning one way. You look down, you're spinning another way. Two different directions, even though you're still spinning left. That your head is the globe. You look up, you're going one way. You look down, you're going the other way. You're on a globe. It's a globe. Explain that to me, flat Earth. And don't even try. I don't want to hear it.
The short explanation, you're an idiot.
It's so ridiculous. Someone will come up with a flat Earth theory to fix that, I'm sure. Or a concave theory. There's all kinds of... Guys, you're on a globe.
Oh, my goodness. So you offer no proof. You offer basically just ridicule and a vulgar display of ignorance, and therefore we live on a globe.
And so, my whole thing is on this. I don't want to make fun of you. But...
Yeah, I don't want to make fun of you either. And your beard is ridiculous.
I find this thing so ridiculous. And I find it so distracting from what is truth. Zach, we want to know the truth.
So let me get this straight. The truth is distracting you from the truth. Okay.
Psalms 119, 142. For thy righteousness is an everlasting righteousness, and thy Torah is the truth. That's where I find truth. But Zach, part of the creation is the earth, and that's part of the... Guys, no, you're making it about that.
The Old Testament clearly describes the world as fixed and immovable, with the sun making circuits around the face of the earth. Period.
The gospel is and has always been, repent, for the kingdom is at hand. Turn from sin. Sin is transgression of the law. Depart from me, you who believe in a flat earth, said no Messiah ever.
Okay, but what did he say about lying or deceiving his children that believe in him? I believe he said that it would be better for a man to have a millstone tied to his neck and thrown into the sea. But who's counting?
Depart from me, you believe in a globe earth, said no Messiah ever. It doesn't matter. You're making it matter, and it doesn't need to be. It's a distraction.
Oh, indeed it is. The globe earth model is very much a distraction from the truth. Deception is a big, huge problem. And by proving the world to be a spinning sphere, you do realize that science proved God was a liar. Because, again, the Bible, if we take it as the Word of God, whether the Old Testament or the New Testament, especially Genesis, God describes the world as a stationary, fixed, immovable plane. Only a few places does it mention the circle of the earth, but it doesn't use the word sphere, and I'm pretty sure that you can verify that in the Torah. The thing is you're saying that it doesn't matter when it absolutely does. Science and evolution claims that the world is simply a cosmic accident, a sheer chance mishap that created this virus of life out of the primordial ooze, and after millions and millions of years of evolution, somehow, intelligent life emerged out of soup. So evolution goes directly against the creation account. And in order for you to subscribe to both, that is to the Judeo-Christian or the Hebrew religion, I guess it would be, I'm not sure. But at any rate, if you subscribe to either of those, and you subscribe to the scientific paradigm, you are confounded in your belief system by default. And so you have to make excuses for one or the other, and you have to make all sorts of compromises and jump through theoretical hoops to make them both work together because, again, Judeo-Christian and Hebrew religion are mutually exclusive with the globe earth model. Now, I'll be very honest with you, I never would have thunk of becoming a flat earther just because of the religious implications. I went through this as a scientific process and a really deep journey into the truth, and I did indeed cast aside the assumptions that we've all been sort of raised to believe, and it was only through that journey that I was able to sort of distill the truth, and of course with the help of many other people that are sort of taking this journey as well. But to say that it doesn't matter is naive, but you really can't have both. You sort of have to pick one or the other. But my point is I really don't even harp too much on the religious implications because to me that was all sort of an afterthought. It certainly doesn't hurt the flat earth model that it's directly in line with the creation account found in Genesis. To me, that only helps to support both of them. But to say that it doesn't matter is ridiculous.
And the enemy's just having a field day with it. He's having a field day with it. Again, we can disagree. You may think it matters, and that's fine. Here's my challenge to you. My challenge is 6 months ago when I started researching this, maybe 8 months ago, whatever it was.
And by research, you mean asking people what they think, right? Because that's what research is.
I was really hot and heavy into this. I researched it a lot. I decided that it was bunk and bogus. And there wasn't a lot of debunk websites out there. There was a few, but not a lot.
So let me guess, you did all your research at the Flat Earth Society and you debunked all of the red herring arguments one by one, just like they told you to, right? I don't know. I guess I'm sort of picking on you hard here, but honestly, I could name 50 proofs and probably a lot more than that, but let's just say I could name 20 proofs, and you can probably have to watch my videos for that because this has gone on way too long, that you've never even mentioned or apparently even considered.
Today, the internet, because this has gained so much steam, this whole flat earth thing has gained so much steam, there are people out there who are putting up flat earth debunk websites all over the place and all kinds of videos.
Okay, so people have done this, people have done that, people do lots of wild things, but think about what you're saying for a second. If the Earth was actually a spinning globe, what would you think is the motive for all of these people to put out flat Earth debunking sites? Why would you have to debunk something that's so, bizarre and untrue? The only reason you would have to do that is if the lie was taught as factual to all people since they were toddlers. That's the only reason that anyone would have to debunk such a wild, crazy lie about the shape and nature of our world. That's one thing that your model really doesn't have going for it. We're actually doing the science. We're not asking people what they think and just looking at debunking websites. We're looking at reality. We're observing nature. We're trying to figure out how this all works, and it certainly doesn't work on a spinning sphere Earth. That's something that none of us have ever experienced. None of us have ever seen a ball with a circumference of 25,000 miles, let alone lived on one. So, the bizarre, nonsensical theory is the spinning globe Earth. The world is actually a stationary plane in truth. And so it's just very difficult sometimes and frustrating because you seem very sure of yourself, and unfortunately you're just misleading people with ignorance, and I'm sorry to say that. I'm not trying to insult you, and I was kidding about your beard. I think you've got a great beard.
So here's the deal. I spent a good amount of time. I did my due diligence. I looked at the Mark Sargent stuff. I looked at the Eric Dubay, Rob's stuff, and I looked at a lot of some of the other ones out there.
So you looked at Mark Sargent stuff, you looked at Eric Dubay stuff, and you looked at Rob Skiba's stuff, and a lot of the other ones out there. I guess that would qualify as due diligence for you, but it isn't. first of all, if you've never read Zetetic Astronomy, that's basically where Eric Dubé got most of his material from. He's got some original stuff, I suppose, but Zetetic Astronomy, is a very important book because it really does prove in so many different ways that the Earth couldn't possibly be a globe. Mark Sargent is basically telling people that we live in an enclosed Truman Show dome, which there's no evidence for that. You can disprove red herring arguments all day long, but at the end of the day, the truth will still be the truth, regardless of how many red herring arguments you may poke holes in. Rob Skiba usually tends to look at this from more of a biblical perspective, but he does offer some good proofs. And I'm really surprised that you wouldn't take the time to go through all of that, because you haven't debunked anything important. What about the horizon always rising to eye level regardless of altitude? What about east to west flight times being identical to west to east flight times? The Coriolis effect is supposedly a characteristic of a spinning body that shows that an object attached to a rotating frame of reference will not remain fixed to that rotating frame of reference once compelled in a direction contrary to the center of axial rotation. And with airplanes traveling from east to west, north to south, and never slipping out of that eastward frame of reference that's supposedly spinning over 1,000 miles per hour near the equator, is conclusive, solid proof that you're wrong. The North Star Polaris remaining fixed over the North Pole season after season after season for all these years, for decades and hundreds of years, proves that the world isn't a spinning globe. The fact that we can see Polaris from as far south as Capricorn proves that we're not on a globe. You can go on and on and on. The upper atmosphere being adjacent to the vacuum of outer space without anything separating the two proves that space is not an infinite vacuum, and therefore the heliocentric model doesn't work. In order to believe the Earth is a globe, you have to believe that everything started as a result of nothing exploding, and you live on a little chunk of nothing that exploded. So if you actually believe that your ancestors were monkeys, then, we're going to have to beg to differ. There's just so many different proofs, and I just mentioned a few. What about the Jeranism effect? We can see the same stars at night overhead from season to season, when if you actually map this out and model the heliocentric thingy, space should be totally opposite ends of the universe from summer to winter, and totally opposite ends of the universe from spring to fall. But instead, what we see are the same stars all night, all year, for hundreds and hundreds of years. All of the constellations have remained fixed in their alignments for thousands of years since they were developed by ancients. And if all of the galaxies were an exploding mess, all traveling in opposite directions at mind-boggling speeds, we couldn't possibly see the same constellations even 2 years in a row. Again, we're supposed to be spinning around the sun, which is spinning around the galactic center, and we can only observe the space at night, so your model doesn't work. What about orbital mechanics? They don't work in theory. If the moon is the slowest body in our little neighborhood here, with the sun being the host of the Earth and the Earth being the host of the moon supposedly travels about 17,000 miles an hour. The Earth supposedly travels at 6,600 miles an hour, and the sun supposedly travels at 500,000 miles an hour, and the galaxy is supposedly hurling through space at 1.3 million miles an hour. But with all these high velocity orbital patterns, often conflicting velocities, and the moon being the slowest little body of them all, beating out the host body, the Earth, around the outside of the track on its nonstop parabolic curve around the sun, it doesn't actually work in reality. If the moon was traveling in the opposite direction of the Earth in part of its spin, and then swings around the outside of the track only to accelerate many times faster than the Earth, faster than the sun, and even faster than the galaxy itself, this doesn't work in reality. And orbital mechanics, especially when you look at things like comets, which sometimes takes hundreds of years to go around the sun and then disappears for hundreds of years and comes back and goes around the sun and disappears for hundreds of years. The sun is supposedly zipping through space and never touches the same spot in space twice. How does the comet know where to go?
And, I don't agree with it. Now, if you guys have been spending the last 6 months on these pro flat earth sites and watching all these videos, what I'm going to challenge you to do, my challenge to you is to go out and find some, just go Google flat earth debunked.
The reason that's such a waste of time is because you can't debunk the truth. Obviously, you were convinced by people who don't know what they're talking about. See, you first have to understand the flat earth model in order to even attempt debunking it. What you've done here is basically regurgitate heliocentrism and debunk red herring arguments. You've also used huge illogical leaps which don't have any basis in reality. You've proved that the sky isn't made out of fiber optic cables, and you've also proved that you haven't really looked at this much. And if you have looked at it a lot, I apologize, but you've looked at very bad sources of information. And one thing that I suggest to you is to don't even really use sources of information. Do some experiments yourself. Try to find curvature. Try to find orbital motion. Try to find axial rotation. And I can guarantee you that you're never going to find it. Now, if you ask a physicist if the Earth is rotating, what do you think he's going to say? He's going to tell you, of course it's rotating, because that's what we've all been led to believe our whole lives. The physicist isn't lying. They're telling you what they believe to be true. But the only person that can distill the truth is yourself. And I really hope that you don't rely on fallible men. And, like I said before, don't even listen to me. But I would urge you to do the experimentation, because you're absolutely incorrect about this.
And spend about 2 weeks on some of these debunk websites and watching these videos. And if at the end of the day, after 2 weeks, you can still tell me that you believe in the flat earth, drive on.
So we have to spend 2 weeks listening to people talk about the masts of ships appearing over the horizon prior to the hole, or we have to spend 2 weeks listening to people talk about others circumnavigating the globe. We have to spend 2 weeks listening to people talk about light proves the globe because of fiber optic cables. No, I'd rather spend my 2 weeks trying to find actual evidence of a globe, which you can't. There is none.
Drive on. I say drive on. And we can disagree. We can be friends. I still love you. I love you. But I'm not going to agree with you. I think it's absolutely ridiculous. And I think the enemy is using it to divide a lot of people and just create confusion where there doesn't need to be.
Yes, you're absolutely correct. The enemy is using this to divide us. So, I love you too, bro. And, I mean it. But I think that you're doing the world a huge disservice by dismissing this. And, if you think you've been hanging out with people that have debunked this, maybe you should try debunking the globe, because that's fairly easy. Debunking the flat earth is a little bit more tricky, because you first need to understand it, and you obviously don't. You've looked at some models, you've looked at some debunkers, but at the end of the day, I think you'd probably be better off doing some experiments yourself. Some of the easiest ones to do involve checking the world for rotational motion, checking the world for curvature, and checking your head for truth.
Depart from me, you who believe in a globe earth, said no Messiah ever. So I'm not getting into this, and I think it's ridiculous. I'll use this video from here on out. All right, but here's the big question. Zach, what about the Bible? The Bible, Zach. The Bible proves a flat earth. Let me say this very clearly and slowly so you understand me. I have not seen one Bible verse, not one Bible verse, either in the Bible or in the book of Enoch, that proves to me that the earth is flat. Not one single one.
What, are you blind and deaf? You've never read the Bible? The Bible clearly states in all sorts of verses, the world is fixed, immovable. God created the world in 7 days. The world is akin to God's footstool. And I realize that there's probably some poor translations in there, but the point is nowhere in the book does it say the earth is a sphere. And, I think what I'll do is probably refer to Tiger Dan 925 on this. And you already mentioned that you knew him. I did notice that he made a response. But I think you're being disingenuous, or maybe you're just plugging your ears and closing your eyes, which doesn't prove anything. But furthermore, I don't think the Bible proves the world flat either. I just think that the Bible was written in a context that everyone knew the earth was a stationary plane, and so it wasn't something that needed to be proved or disproved. However, it definitely appears that the Word of God is in line with the flat earth model, and is certainly not in line with the spinning globe earth, that's for sure.
And I'm going to come out with a video after this that showcases the top 5 Bible verses that prove that the earth is round. Top 5 Bible verses that prove the earth is round.
Well, again, the Bible isn't going to prove or disprove anything like that. That's not what it was intended for, but round is certainly a different thing than a sphere. My pizza is round. Does that mean my pizza is a sphere? If the earth is round, does that mean the earth is a sphere? No, it doesn't. But again, I don't think the Bible was ever intended to be a science book. It certainly is technically correct in terms of the world being a stationary plane, but I don't think you're necessarily using the right book. I wouldn't use a science book either, because all they're going to do is shove your head full of globe earth illogic. But at any rate, Tiger Dan will probably do a good job refuting that video, so I probably won't touch that one. I've had about enough of this, but we'll finish it up, and yeah.
You're going to be amazed. I know you can't wait, right? So I'm coming out with that. And I'm going to use these 2 videos from anybody who emails me from here on out and say, here's where I stand on this topic. And I'm going to shout it far and wide on my website, New2Torah.com, so people can see this. I just think it's ridiculous. I don't think it's worth studying. It was interesting to study out because, if it was true, I wanted to know about it. But I wasn't going to make it a focal point of my ministry ever.
See, that's ultimately the problem you had, is you never truly suspended your disbelief of the globe. And again, in order to be an unbiased scientific observer, you really can't be emotionally attached to any one model or another. The most ridiculous thing can still be scientifically scrutinized, and you might be surprised, but to dismiss something because you think it's ridiculous is the opposite of science. And I understand that you're a Bible scholar and a Torah scholar, but I really don't see how that qualifies you to purport things on this topic, because, again, you've only sort of looked at this as a bizarre conspiracy theory. However, that really isn't what it is. It's just the plain, simple truth. And just because you think it's ridiculous, that doesn't prove anything. It just proves that you're a biased observer. And it seems to me that you were very close to understanding the truth, but instead of doing experimentation and research the correct way, you went and hung out with a bunch of people who convinced you that it was stupid. So again, that's not very scientific. I'd rather count the horse's teeth than debate it personally.
Oh, great, the earth is flat. The earth is flat. But, listen, it's all about sin. It's about, what is sin? Turn, repent, understand God's law, keep his feast days, keep his name holy, keep what he says and do what he says, guard his commandments. That's what it's about. And love God and love your neighbor. That's all you need to do. Go forth and preach to the nations that the earth is flat.
Let's just say, hypothetically, for a moment, that the Earth is a flat, stationary plane. Just for argument's sake, just say that is what it is. You don't see any problem with all the children in the world being completely misled about the shape and nature of the world? You think that's okay? You don't think we should know the truth and really prove this thing one way or another? You don't think that if it is true, you just think we should keep it to ourselves and forget about it and let the Illuminati continue just ruining the minds of all the children of all generations from here to kingdom come. I think that's a huge problem. I don't think we should be teaching children lies at all. I think we should let them discern the truth and distill the truth for themselves and guide them in the right direction, of course. But to just shove their head full of obvious lies and create people who mock others for simply looking at this thing objectively is very sad. And I think it's a huge problem. And the fact that you don't think it's a problem is one of the biggest parts of the problem.
Guys, it's a distraction, and the enemy's having a fun time with it. So here's the deal. That's my challenge. Go study, go Google Flat Earth Debunked. Spend 2 weeks there. If you still think the Earth is flat, good on you. If not, thank goodness.
I think that's an awful thing to do. I think it's good to, get some information online, but I would suggest to people that instead of going and asking cynics or critics or people who think it's stupid what they think, hang out with some flat earthers, hang out with some debunkers, all you want, but ultimately make up your mind on your own. Don't just blindly follow people. Use the scientific method. That's what it's there for. Gossip will never get you any closer to the truth, that's for sure.
And I'm coming out with a video on the top 5 Bible verses that prove a round earth. All right, I think that's about it. Is there anything else? I don't think so. I know. I can't believe I did a video on this. But it is what it is.
If you wish, you can support this channel more easily now via PayPal to paypal.me/TheMorgile1 or the regular way through PayPal to jonelance@gmail.com or through FanFunding on YouTube, although I believe that's only for a limited time as of now, which is January 30th, 2017. God bless.
I can't believe I did a video on this. But it is what it is. All right. But it is what it is. All right. Leave it at that. Go home.
I can't believe you did a video on this either. Really. That was pretty bad.